from a secessionist position? Are we going to look at constitutional engineering? Are we going to look at other models that have not been evolved? For those of us who study African politics as a career, we've been dealing with major issues. How do we do balancing in plural societies like Cameroon and Nigeria and other plural societies? What models can work? And how do you deal with a dual society like Rwanda, the Hutu and the Tutsi? And how can you deal with Somalia? All these issues are part of the broader canvas in discussing African politics. Let me now yield to the first person who will pose questions on the history, origins, historical process. Welcome.
Well, before I think Maggie, you should unmute.
Yes, I have. Thank you very much, Professor.
Maggie, please, you can start.
Yes, yes. We're going to start with Professor Anyangwe actually making some opening remarks before I pose my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tonyin Falola, for having me on this show, and thank you, viewers, for coming to the show. Permit me at the very beginning of our conversation to make a few brief remarks before we proceed. I do believe we have enough time to have these remarks and enough time on our hands for the question to be asked, and for me to try and answer the questions as best as I can. The preliminary remarks I want to make will touch on a number of issues. The name Ambazonia, which I intend to use throughout this conversation. A brief historical timeline, because this is very important for many of our guests and many of our viewers who perhaps do not know where we're coming from. I'll touch briefly on the issue of territorial integrity, secession, and terrorists. As you know, were being demonized as terrorists, as secessionists, and so on. And I'll also talk about, briefly also, in personal remark, about the insulting special status, which some presume to be able to give us. And the whole question of being a minority, quite often when you read the press, international press, or when people write, the first thing they do is to say, well, we're dealing here with a minority. This is why a minority. And then the whole discourse on genocide, I'll just touch on that briefly, and the international community. And I'll answer the question whether liberation is feasible, because this is one of the questions which I think was asked. Now, the first one on the question of Ambazonia. The identity question has always tormented us, right from the word start. You know, we were with Nigeria from 1914 to 1960. Many people thought or considered us as Nigerians. And as you are aware, even the people of Cameroon Republic do refer to us as Nigerians, if they're in a good mood. But even in a bad mood, they refer to us as Biafrans. Thereafter, from 1961 to 1972, we're in a federal arrangement with Cameroon Republic. And during that federal arrangement, we're called West Cameroon. And then from 1972 to date, our territory has been split into two and variously referred to as northwest, southwest province, northwest, southwest, now they call it region. So what you see is we are named and called like a child or like a slave who is given a name. And like a child or a slave, we have no say. We've never had any say in the choice of our name. When the British were Southern Cameroonians, so fine, Southern Cameroonians, call us Southern Cameroons. Then at some point they said, no, we're West Cameroon. They always start calling us West Cameroonians. Then at some point they said, no, we're Northwest, Southwest. We start calling, here, people still call themselves Southwestern and Northwestern and so on and so forth. And I understand these days, the Cameroon Republic will refer to us as Noso. So I wonder whether we are called Nosoians, perhaps. So the identity issue has been dodging us, has been following us badly. We are simply a people without an identity at all. But I want to submit to you that we need not submit to that those names which are imposed on us. We need to have a toponym of our own. And this is consistent with what an expert meeting of the UNESCO recommended in 1978. And they said African countries should give themselves a name they want to be known and they want to be called by. And that's why you saw a flurry of change of names in Africa, many countries. You know, you have Upper Volta already changed itself, become Burkina Faso, you know, Lincoln like Gold Coast became Ghana. And they had a flurry of countries just changing their names like that, which was consistent with the recommendation which was made by these experts. And so for us, part of our liberation is giving ourselves an identity once and for all. And that identity, that toponym, is Ambazonia. And Ambazonia is the zone on Ambas Bay and the zone in the hinterland. That's where you have the conflation of that zone and Ambazonia. So you have Ambazonia. And this is consistent with how countries name themselves. Even Cameroon Republic was named after crayfish, as you all know. In the Douala area there, the people call it Cameroons, which is crayfish. And the name has stuck with them, you know, so they're a crayfish country. So for us, therefore, our toponym is Ambazonia, and the demonym is Ambazonian. And that puts an end to this confusion about Cameroon. Because when you keep on calling yourself Cameroon, or even when you add the south or west or east or whatever there, people don't hear about that. What they hear is Cameroon. And so that is why one diplomat in America was able to say, we are still unable to rid ourselves from that Cameroon-ness to call ourselves Cameroon. So that's why throughout this discussion, conversation, I always talk about Ambazonia, referring to the territory, and Ambazonia, referring to the people. Now, many people don't realize, and if you listen to what official orthodoxy in Cameroon Republic, they tell us the colonial intervention started in 1884 with the Germans and so on and so forth. Then they go on from there. Very few people, I'll submit, know, and if they know, they've not been able to express it and say, that we have a history that goes far, far, far before even the German proclamation of 1884 in the Douala area there. The mountain today, the Fako Mountain, or Boya Mountain, we sometimes call it, were discovered in between quotes, in 450 BCE, the era before Jesus Christ. Amazing. Very few people ever know that. And Hano, who discovered it, called it the chariots of the gods. Most have heard that expression, chariot of the gods. That was in 450 before Christ. And then in 1640, the Portuguese were already at that coast along what you now call Bimbia and Tico, that area that they were there. And since then, we've had a connection. After the Portuguese, is the British who came. 1833, Colonel Nichols visited Bimbia, wanted to claim it for Britain. And if you look off the coast of Bimbia, you'll find an island there. It's called Nichols Island. It was named after him. Came in 1833. Then 1844, Joseph Mary came. Then you have the, that same year, there was Anglo Bimbia Treaty. A series of treaties were signed between the British and the local chiefs from Bimbia through Victoria, through Victoria, Bota, Batoke, right up to Bamoso, concluded no less than 13 treaties, Anglo British treaties there, which were concluded. So we had this British presence, which was there right up to 1887, sorry. And then famously in 1858, Victoria was founded by the British Baptist Missionary Society and became the first ever settled British Catholic colony on the West Coast. And they had a government for 30 years. Victoria established government there, 30 years. It was only in 1887 that the British, for reasons which, of course, I mean, still remain, they decided to transfer all of that territory to Germany. Remember that at that time, when a colonial power came to the coast and took possession of the coast, the theory was that the hinterland belonged to that colonial power, or what was called the sphere of influence. So by having all that coast from Bamoso through Bota, Victoria, Bimbia, which was a thriving town at that time, the printing press was established in Bimbia well back in 1840. Many people don't know that. Now, all of that and the hinterland of that fell onto the British by virtue of the hinterland theory and the sphere of influence theory. So in 1887, that is when the British decided to transfer that to the Germans. Unfortunately for the Germans, in 1885 at the Berlin Conference, a decision had been taken that the Europeans should do away with this sphere of influence thing because it's causing a lot of rivalry between European colonial powers. And they adopted a new theory, what they call effective occupation. In other words, you cannot claim a territory until you have effectively occupied that territory. That is why the Germans, even though you had that transfer, the Germans had to fight their way, every inch of their way to get the territory. You know about the war between the Bakure and the Germans. You know the war that in Kumba, right up to Manfe, Bali, as it goes up, you know? And that's how the Germans were. They had to conquer the territory every inch of the way. Without that conquest, you can't say they had the territory. And unfortunately for the Germans, this whole process of trying to conquer the territory took such a long time, right to the very eve of the First World War. And what happened? The World War started in early August. By the end of August, the British are retaking what I call retaking part of the Ambazonan territory, all the way from Bamoso, come right down to Victoria, right up inwards. And this time they had to push right up to Lake Chad as part of that territory. In 1916, when the Germans were finally defeated in that German colony of Cameroon, the territory was split. Germany had been defeated. So they split in 1916. The British took one little part, bordering on Nigeria, and the French took the rest. The question, why is it that the British took such a small territory? After all, it was the British who captured Douala. Many people don't know this. The British, with the naval power, bombarded Douala and subdued it and took it from the Germans. They left it to the French. The British were the one who captured all the way up to Garoua, Mara, all those places. And British entered Yaoundé. Why is it that they didn't take that territory? The British answer was that, well, we're not interested in additional territory. We wanted something that will give us secure borders with Nigeria. That's what they wanted for Nigeria. And that's why they took such a small territory. So in 1919, what happened was the partition that took place in 1916, Anglo-French partition, was confirmed at the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. And that partition, again, was reconfirmed by the League of Nations in 1922. So 1919, legally, the German territory of Cameroon ceased to exist, became extinct. Ceased to exist. Can make some historical footnote and say, well, the Germans occupied from 1884 to 1916, but that was just a historical note, but it ceased to exist. So during the League of Nations, when they divided the territory, after the partition, the League of Nations said, well, the British should take the part you had already given to herself in 1916. That became what was known as the British Cameroons. A series of British administration ordinances were proclaimed by the British between 1923 and 1929. The effect of that was to divide the British Cameroon into two: Northern British Cameroons and the Southern British Cameroons, but held, as far as the League of Nations was concerned, as one mandated territory. And that situation remained like that until 1946, when the United Nations came along and confirmed again that division: British Cameroon, French Cameroon. And that is where we held. But the partition, the internal partition the British had done, comes Southern Cameroons and Northern Cameroons. Effectively, practically, there were two distinct territories. We never had one assembly of Northern Cameroon. We never had any one political party of Northern Cameroon, not at all. So effectively they were held as two separate territories. And so a plebiscite was held in 1961. In 1961 plebiscite, again, that's where I had some misrepresentation by people who have not read sufficiently the records. The question was, do you wish to achieve independence? Cameroon Republic authorities always choose to forget that phrase, achieving independence. They just jump and they say, do you want to join French Cameroon or do you want to join Nigeria? No, it was, do you wish to achieve independence by joining the Independent Republic of Cameroon or the Independent Republic of Nigeria? And the result of the plebiscite was very clear. It said in the Southern Cameroons, the people expressed a wish that they want to join Cameroon Republic. And now this is one aspect I need to underline, which people also always forget. Joining was understood by the British, the Southern Cameroons, the United Nations, and Cameroon Republic to mean federating. The records are there very clear. There was no other meaning of joining, but federating. And yet I've heard people say, and Cameroon Republic authorities say, oh, at the plebiscite, Ambazonians voted to reunify with and ask, where I never saw any question asking about reunification. There was no such thing. It was never used. It is never used. It is not there on any UN record talk about reunification. So I don't know where they come about. And they couldn't have. Because there was no reunification here. In fact, if there was any issue about reunification, that should go with joining Nigeria, actually. Because they've been with Nigeria for 40 long years, or 40 how many? So if we went to Nigeria, it was a case of reuniting with Nigeria. We had been with them. You know, we had never been with French Cameroon, never before. So the reunification thesis is a very wrong one. So that decision was made, and in April 1961, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution by which it endorsed the decision of the people of the Southern Cameroons to federate with Cameroon Republic. And that was going to be effective on the 1st of October, 1961, the date of the termination of the trusteeship. But this is where part of our problem started. On the 1st of September 1961, what happened? French Cameroon or Cameroon Republic unilaterally adopted a constitutional document. In fact, it was not even a constitution, it was an amendment to its 1960 constitution and passed it off as a federal constitution. Yeah, what they claimed was a federal constitution. It was an amendment law. It was not even a constitution, it was a constitutional amendment law, amended this thing. And in that constitution, we're no longer called the Southern Cameroons. They told us that we're now West Cameroon. They gave us that name. So 1st October, that constitution, which the people of West Cameroon never had any say at all, and it was never adopted by the parliament of Southern Cameroon, Ambazonia, came into effect. The irony is when it came into effect, remember, the constitution adopted by Cameroon Republic alone, without the concurrence of Ambazonia, without even the concurrence of the Ambazonian parliament in Boya. It wasn't. Adopted it unilaterally and imposed it. And in that constitution, they gave us a new name. They were West Cameroon people. And people started calling themselves West Cameroonians. And ironically, what happened was we became a federated state in that federation. And this is something which people have not paid sufficient attention to. And the people of Cameroon Republic would like to turn the record. And that's why they've been trying to turn the record. Because in that 61 constitution, Cameroon Republic ceased to be a sovereign independent state standing on its own. It became a federated state like Ambazonia. And that's why that's why they talked of federating of two states equal in status. The equality in status was respected there. The federated state of West Cameroon, the federated state of East Cameroon. That's what Cameroon Republic became, East Cameroon. So you had a very, very interesting situation where an independent sovereign state now accepted a much more lower status of federated state under an overarching federal government. But immediately that was done, the President Ahidjo, who was a native of Cameroon Republic, decided to start turning the clock around. What did he do? He appointed an administrator in the good old style, colonial style, an administrator to go and minister West Cameroon, even though West Cameroon had a prime minister. And they again people did not pay particular attention. If he was inspector of administration or whatever, what was his job? What was the prime minister's job? But we didn't pay particular attention to that. And so we had a situation where West Cameroon was a federated state, but at the same time subjected to administration of Cameroon Republic, who was president, hailed from there. We enjoyed that situation. Again, our people on questioning at that time as they were, endured it, tried to make some petitions and some which were ignored. And in 1972, this time, after the administrator thing, nobody questioned, we didn't take any action. 1972, they decided this time, so well, better just take over the whole territory. And so they claimed that they're instituting a unity state. That was the President Ahidjo, instituted a unity state. So the Federal Republic was abolished. The Federated State of West Cameroon was abolished together with its government, with all government institutions, with all government things, were all abolished. And not only that, they were vandalized and looted because the archives in Buea, public service, in the ministries in Buea, everything were simply thrown to backs of military trucks, taken to Yaoundé and set on fire. That was it. And they started going and occupying all those buildings. If you look around, there's no one single structure that Cameroon Republic has put up ever since. All they've been doing going around using existing structures, which they never even constructed. And that situation remained until 1982, when Ahidjo on leaving, President Ahidjo on leaving, appointed Mr. Bimbia as his successor as the president. And Bimbia took oath as the president of the United Republic. But 2 years later, Bimbia somersaulted. And Bimbia somersaulted. What did he do in 1984? He simply revived, conjured up La République du Cameroun. Remember, that République du Cameroun had died, had become extinct in 1961, did not exist anymore. So all of a sudden, like a magician getting a rabbit from his hat, popped up La République du Cameroun. Now that would have been okay if they popped La République du Cameroun and asserted a separate independence and so on. But the problem started when, after doing that, they laid claim to the territory of Ambazonia as part of the territory of La République du Cameroun. That's where the problem started. And then people were therefore able to say, you had seceded, and now you're proclaiming the formal annexation of Ambazonia. And so in 1999, President Bimbia decided to name, again, give us a different name now. Ahidjo has said we are now called Northwest Southwest provinces. President Hejo came now, and Bimbia came now and said, no, we are not provinces. You are now North Southwest region. And right now, as we speak, they changed that also. We're now called NOSO. And moving towards some special status. I don't know what the name of that special status would be. So under President Bimbia, the process of assimilation and Gallicization was intensified. And it reached a very, very intense level. So much so that in 2016, our people could take it no more. Ambassadors could take it no more. And the rest, of course, as you know, is history since 2016. So the point is worth making that while the colonial history of Cameroon Republic dates from the inception of German colonization in 1884, that of Ambazonia began much more earlier. The colonial history of Ambazonia dates from 1833 with the British intervention, anti-slavery activity. So it is difficult to understand how anybody can say, if you look at our combined period of German, with the British, which count to about some 54 years before the German intervention. And then if you add the further period during the 1914 to 1961, you combine that, you find 100 years of British connection. And so how can anybody come and tell us that that should be discounted? And what should matter is the 25 odd years with the Germans. 25 odd years. Because from 1887, when the Germans took over, well, in law took over, but had to have effective occupation. And we know that up to about 1890 and so on, they were still struggling to have some community under them. And that's why this whole idea of all of us, Cameroon Republic and Ambazonia, starting off from 1884, does not wash at all, doesn't. Third thing I want to say is territorial integrity. This is something you've heard quite often. You know, some governments, they will tell you, oh, we respect the territorial integrity of Cameroon. And we have said it over, and some people. And they use that as an excuse for saying, oh, therefore what we are doing is we are seceding. Even some say, that's why we are terrorists, because you refuse to respect the territorial integrity of Cameroon. But let me just say this. Territorial integrity is never claimed and enjoyed in a vacuum. It doesn't happen. It's never. It is enjoyed within a state-specific territorial framework. And that framework must be secured by international boundaries, backed up by treaties, international boundary treaties. Because once the boundary has been agreed, it stands. You cannot change it. At least not unilaterally. You have to change it. It has to be by agreement with the parties involved. Territorial integrity cannot be claimed and enjoyed by an amorphous entity. Cameroon Republic, at one point, its frontiers, its boundaries having frozen on 1st of January 1960, on the date it achieved independence from France. And then it claims that in 1961, its borders changed. They're claiming that they're still Cameroon Republic. They're not no federation, no exists. I'll show later. That's what Ahijo was saying. It was still Cameroon Republic. So the borders have now expanded. Then as you go on, the borders shrink because Cameroon Republic ceased to exist. So the borders now cease to exist. Then all of a sudden, like a magic, in 1984, Cameroon Republic reappears with borders now that include the borders, the territory of Ambazonia. No, you can't have a changing concept of territorial integrity. One moment it is this, next moment it is that, and so on and so forth. No, it doesn't work that way. At least that is not the understanding of under international law. That is not the understanding under the African Union Constitutive Act. And there, the African Union Constitutive Act is very clear that it proclaims the principle, the sanctity of borders existing on the date of achievement of independence. The sanctity of borders. Those borders cannot change. The borders were frozen on the day of independence. You now understand why Cameroon Republic has been running away from its Independence Day. Because if it were to foreground that, were to proclaim that, it has implications. So they run away. And they created a fiction, which they call 20th May. Because that 20th May followed after that colonized, taken over Ambazonia. So they can now claim that our borders go right to that place. That's the strategy they're using. No, but I think you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all of the time. It doesn't work that way. So that is what happened. It must stay within its borders. And when the African Union talks about, they are talking about borders existing on the achievement of independence. That is the territorial integrity we're talking about. It cannot be any other, the integrity of any other territory. It cannot be. So I think people should have that very clear in their mind when we talk about that, you know. Now, if somebody may ask, but so how come Cameroon Republic is claiming the territory of Ambazonia as its territory? Let me submit to you there are three sources of that claim. One, there is a lunatic fringe in Cameroon Republic that says Ambazonians have no territory that can properly be claimed or be said to be their own. And that Ambazonians are simply Biafran refugees who fled from Nigeria during the Civil War and were graciously allowed by President Ahijo to settle on Cameroon territory. I don't know what word to use to describe this kind of thing. All I can say is the people who say those things are actually a lunatic fringe. Secondly, President Ahijo stated in 1962 at his UC party conference in Ebolova that the federating of Ambazonia and Cameroon Republic did not result in the creation of a new state, but simply the continuation of Cameroon Republic. We simply welcome Ambazonia as part of its territory returned to it by the UK and the UN. Sometimes you read someone, you wonder where are these people to live of their reasoning faculty? I don't understand, I don't know, or they don't read, I don't know. That's what he said in open, declared it. The third source comes from the land and maritime boundary dispute between Cameroon and Nigeria. Now, this is the reasoning. The reasoning is that the International Court of Justice declared that sovereignty over the Bakassi Island belongs to Cameroon Republic. And therefore, they argue, since sovereignty over Bakassi belongs to Cameroon Republic, therefore, the whole territory of Ambazonia belongs to Cameroon Republic. Again, incredible. And these things are said, some of them who are supposed to know. The law is very, very clear. The issue of sovereignty over Ambazonia or title to Ambazonia, even the Bakassi, was never before the court. A court of law does not decide issues that are not placed before it and argue before it. It doesn't do that. So where you have people coming from with all of these ideas, I do not understand. So first of all, that case was not about sovereign title to Ambazonia. No, there was no such thing. The court was not requested to pronounce itself on the legality of Cameroon Republic's occupation of and rule in Ambazonia. That was not put before the court. If that had been put, the court would have had to decide that point. It was never put before the court. Secondly, the issue of sovereignty over Ambazonia or title even to Bakassi was again never put before the court. Like I've said, courts do not decide issues that were not put before it and argued. The final point on this to make is that the decision in that case, like any other decision of the International Court of Justice in a contentious matter, has no binding force whatsoever except as between the parties to the case and in respect to that particular case. So the decision in that case has no binding force of law in the relation between Ambazonia and Cameroon Republic. And for all we know, the issue might still be open. So sometimes I don't understand how, and some of these things are said by some people who are supposed to know better in Cameroon Republic. Now, a fourth source of this whole thing of claim to territorial embarrassment derives from the case which we submitted at the African Human Rights Commission, the case of Kevin Gumne against Cameroon Republic. And in that case, Cameroon Republic claimed sovereignty rights to Ambazonia. And what it said was the process of decolonization of Ambazonia gave Ambazonia to us. Again, they're referring to 1961 plebiscite. And they're arguing that, at the plebiscite, the vote meant that the poor Ambazonia decided on their own simply to give their territory and themselves to Cameroon Republic. For what? I don't know. It has never happened. Why would they do that? That would have been collective suicide. And next one is, and you heard this when Bimbia was being interviewed by Mo Ibrahim in Paris. What did Bimbia say? In his warped logic, Bimbia identifies German Cameroon as his country. He says, my country, Cameroon, the German Cameroon, that's his country. And then from that premise, he proceeds to argue that because Ambazonia was at one time part of that German Cameroon, which is his country, therefore, Ambazonia is part of his country, Cameroon Republic. I don't, frankly, even a beginning student of logic would not think that way. But that's how he thought. And I'm sure he went home sleeping, feeling fine. He did it. And he demonstrated that Ambazonia is part of Cameroon Republic. And the final one is something which we don't pay attention to. If you notice, there has been what I call the cartographical incorporation of Ambazonia in Cameroon Republic. And that is the source of the error that comes from outside. When people say Ambazonia is part of Cameroon Republic, what are they actually saying? They've picked up a map and they look at it and they see it drawn there and right there, Cameroon. So they say you're part of Cameroon. But that is simply a cartographical incorporation without authority and without the permission of the people of Ambazonia. And this is consistent. This is what happens quite often throughout history. And I'll give you just a few examples. When we were with Nigeria, look at any Nigeria map at that time. Were included as part of Nigeria. Was that correct? Of course not. You see, the person who draws up a map simply takes those things. The cartographer does not guarantee that the lines he puts on a piece of paper represent the true situation on the ground. No, he doesn't do that. He just puts that off. Recently, Eritrea drew up a map, and that was of course a war between Eritrea and Djibouti, and represent part of Djibouti as part of the territory of Eritrea. Put out those maps. Fortunately, when Djibouti saw those maps, protested, argued and argued and argued and argued and argued. And that's what we ought to have done. If you don't argue, the situation goes on and people began to come to settle opinion that, well, that is it, it's part of it. Look at any country that achieved independence, you see. At some point, some countries try to be very, very smart. If you look at the map of Morocco, it includes the Western Sahara as part of Morocco. When part of Western Sahara was part of Mauritania, Mauritania map shows Mauritania as including part of that Western Sahara. This is what all expansionist and colonialist countries do. And they do that in the hope that the people concerned will not notice it and therefore do not protest. And when you don't notice it, the situation stays. Libya at one time got the Austin Strip from Chad and started issuing maps which showed the Austin Strip as part of Libya. But Chad was smart enough to detect that and to protest. Libya was forced not to withdraw the maps. So we, in a sense, went to sleep and allowed that situation to prevail. We didn't do anything about it, we have protested. And I think part of that protest is our liberation struggle right now. So all the things which you hear President Ahijo said, President Biya said, and all whatever things is the advisors, the French advisors, all is pure sophistry. The statements they make lack merit on every count, whether historical, legal, or cultural. They are all simply political intrigues. They are factually false, and they have very little substance. Again, question of secession. We have been called secessionists and so on, but let me submit to you. When you hear a country with alacrity refers to people as secessionists or as terrorists, that should be a clear indication to you that that is a colonial authority. Colonials are fierce, they fear the oppressed. When the oppressed rise, they fear. And one way of trying to discourage them is to raise up this bogey about secession in the hope that they can deflect the freedom fighters from asserting authority over their God-given territory. It has never worked throughout history. You can shout secession from morning till evening. Once people are convinced and they know you try to steal that territory, they will never be deflected and always they win. We've seen that happen throughout history. So it's not going to change here. So we, Ambazonians, it's not only now, since 1961, we've always been called secessionists, we've always been called terrorists. Remember, for Cameroon Republic, the federation was simply secession. And anybody talking about federation is a secessionist. But I don't think anybody has ever bothered about that. The point about secession, let me say this is, although I hear many people talk as though secession is a crime and so on, frankly, international law is completely indifferent to secession. Whether a territory secedes or doesn't secede means nothing to the international law. There is no international law rule that prohibits secession, not one. And it cannot even be. Because if you look at history, we have now 193 or 95 or 94 UN member states. There's no one of them that has come into being without undergoing a process of secession from an existing power or state. They have. America seceded from the British Empire. All of African countries, they seceded and asserted independence. Because those colonized territories were in law the territory of the colonizing power. And when you got independence, you secede. Sometimes the secession is consensual, you agree, between the colonial authority and the oppressed people. Sometimes it is by force. In both cases, it is still secession. So international law can never prohibit secession because it's a normal evolutionary process under the human condition of states. Once, by saying that, I'm not saying that international law encourages what you may say secession or whatever. It doesn't encourage it. It doesn't prohibit it. And once a seceding entity establishes itself, international law always recognizes it. That's part of international law. You can't change it. And for people, for the record, let me just tell people that Ambazonians were very much aware of the possibility of us having problems with Cameroon Republic on this score. And what did they do? At Fumban inconclusive meeting, you recall, the Ambazonian delegation submitted that in the framing of the federal constitution, the future, there must be inserted in that federal constitution an exit clause, right? You call it a secessionist clause. They insisted on that. There must have to be. President he just scratched his head, went up and down and so on. And then said, okay, we can look for a compromise. What was the compromise? Cameroon Republic had insisted that in their constitution, there must be written the clause, what they call one and indivisible inside. The ambassador delegation said, we are not interested in one and indivisible. We want an exit clause. So the two of ambassadors can leave when we feel that we're uncomfortable with this arrangement. So the compromise, we arrived, I was say, okay. Ahejo, you remove your, Ahejo said he will remove his one and indivisible thing. And the ambassador said, okay, we will not insist on this exit clause, we trust you on this. So by removing the clause, one and indivisible means you do recognize that our political association doesn't make us one and indivisible. At some point, the relationship may break up. So that's why in the federal constitution, you never saw anything like one and indivisible thing. Ahejo a letter to revive, bring in that thing about one and indivisible. Again, another breach of confidence. Another particular moment. Ambassador had the right to have insisted on the exit clause. But ambassador could not, because neither the 1961 constitution, nor 1972 constitution, or Bia's own constitutional arrangement, ambassador was not involved in any of those things. Even the plot to murder the federation, not a single ambassador was involved. They were all people of French Cameroon origin. So always been at the back seat, not involved in anything. So the idea of terrorism is even more damning, because if you look at it, it is Cameroon Republic that is more of a terrorist state. And it has demonstrated this in many respects since 1961. Many people don't know. Colonial terrorism is a very serious thing. It's a very bad thing. Because apart from the colonial oppression, the political oppression is added on top, colonial terrorism, violence which is used to subjugate the people and to keep them so that they don't rise up against the colonial authority. That's what colonial terrorism is all about. And French Cameroon, Cameroon Republic has always, from the word go, even when we had not even had August 1961, resorted to terror. Why do you think they love Kale so much? Kale, for those who don't know, is a cordon and search operation which the armed forces mount against civilians, drag people out in the night, beat them and so on, and do whatever they want and under the guise of some security reason. You know, this has been going on.
Professor Anyangwe, you've been talking for 52 minutes.
Oh, sorry. I felt there was some of this which I needed to, but perhaps I'll just end here.
That's fine. You've been speaking for 52 minutes, and you've provided a long history, and we appreciate it. You've cut into the time of Miss Maggie Kilo. Unfortunately, I will allow only 2 questions, so that we can move to the outcome. Maggie, please, 2 questions.
I thought we had 4 hours, so that's why. Yeah, okay.
That's okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor, for that historic analysis presentation, which makes my job very easy. So I'm going to ask you, once the Amazonian leaders realized that the regime of Amadou Ahidjo had violated an important article of the Constitution that dealt with the maintenance of the federal system of 2 equal states. What actions did they take, or have they taken over the years to rectify the problem? And why have these measures not yielded any fruit, if they have at all? What fruit have they yielded to the people?
First of all, I think I'll answer that very. There was none in 1972 when President Ahidjo did what he did. There was none. I think my interpretation is that it was so such a shock. If you follow those events, Ajo with his conspirators had worked up all of that thing, then he came to what was then the National Assembly. It was all well orchestrated. They first went to political bureau, and 5-10 minutes later, they were in the National Assembly. Now, Ajo made that thing. You could see how all the people of Cameroon Republic stood up and in thunderous applause. And remember, and that arrangement, how many people we had there from West Cameroon? Just 10. They were so taken aback by this whole thing that they didn't have any appropriate response. Like people said, like in a bewildered mood, we had no choice. I mean, this was completely unawares. And the anecdotal event is that there were some MPs who wanted to take action, to revolt. And they went and met at the home of the late Dr. Fondon. And according to this anecdote, Dr. Fondon advised that, well, this thing has done. We've been taken completely unawares. Let's not do anything. Let's leave the battle to be fought by the younger generation that is coming. And they left it at that. Now, having left it at that, the leaders started a process of conscientization to make our people, the younger generation, realize what happened, because the whole story about our federating with French Cameroon was all in one whole mix. Nobody knew, had clear-cut ideas and so on. So it was important to start educating people, telling them that exactly what happened at the UN, what happened with the plebiscite, what happened with joining or federating with Cameroon Republic, you know, from the abolition of the multi-party system, thriving multi-party system in what we call West Cameroon in those days, 1966, the promulgation of by decree of the famous subversion ordinance, the equivalent of a terrorism law in a modern context, and then leading right up to what happened in 1972. And that process of conscientization went on. And that is why subsequently you found people started thinking, and the SDF was able to come. You found the SCNC, the Anglophone conference that were held, coming on. And all these processes were as a result of what happened in 1972. And we find ourselves today where we find ourselves.
My next question has to do with territorial integrity. And yes, I'm going to combine it actually with the relationship between Francophones and Anglophones in the marginalization. So Yaoundé often argues about territorial integrity of the two parts of the country coexisting. But we see that one and indivisible doesn't really work, because we've had Ethiopia and Eritrea split, we've had Sudan and South Sudan split, and we are seeing the situation between Somaliland and Somalia. So the only federation that remains intact today is the Tanganyika Zanzibar, which is today's Tanzania. Even the arrangement between Senegal and the Gambia in the 80s failed. So when we talk about territorial integrity in the current situation in Cameroon, what is it that the Southern Cameroonians can use to say, this territorial integrity that you're talking about doesn't really make sense? But, and I add the marginalization issue, because you have 80% and 20%, and just recently we saw the appointments in CRTV where Charles Ndongo, a junior, less educated director general than all the Anglophones who work in CRTV, says out of 17 directorate positions, he couldn't find a single Anglophone to take up a directorate position in CRTV. So when you look at that marginalization and you see the way Anglophones who work in the system in La République say that they don't see themselves working or living in a free, independent Southern Cameroons, yet they don't realize, how do you convince them that every single position in Southern Cameroons, in an independent Southern Cameroons, will be managed by Southern Cameroonians? We will never, never, never have to talk about Francophones and Anglophones with the 20% being marginalized in our own country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have wrapped so many issues in that one question, so many, and very critical issues for that matter. Let me start with the last issue about the appointments. What happens in a foreign country is not a business of Ambazonia. The first thing, I think Ambazonians who live in that foreign country will realize that every country is free to hire heads and hands from anywhere it wants to. When it does that as a matter of favor. The appointee is not God as a matter of right. Has no right, has no entitlement, and therefore can always not be appointed, or if appointed, can always be thrown out at any time. It's not like you're a national who can say, well, I have the right to this employment and so on. You cannot assert it. That's always been. So foreign countries do that. That's why Joseph, a Jew, was able to rise up to the position of prime minister in Egypt. And the European countries, they had a tradition of hiring sailors and soldiers from other countries to fight their wars or to explore for them and so on. So it's a tradition that's been going on. And in the colonial system, the French had a lot of French Cameroon people in their system. So these Ambazonians who are there will learn the hard way that when you are in a foreign country, there's nothing you can claim as a matter of right or an entitlement. Everything depends upon the goodwill of that country. Doesn't matter how you shine, you might shine like a star. They may decide to ignore you. You have no recourse at all. So I think they will learn in the hard way. And I think they do understand that in their own home country, they are not going to face all these kind of problems which they are facing, Because even in your own home country, you are entitled to challenge the appointing authority. You can challenge them and say, well, I have been bypassed for appointment for this ground, for this ground, and so on and so forth, and allege other discrimination or some other reason. But in a foreign country, you cannot do that. To ask you have no standing at all. Who are you going to try to want to contest what we are saying? Now this links up with the other issue which you raised, the issue of a minority. Again, when you hear, and I see this often, journalists, when they start writing, the first thing they put forward to say, oh, what they call Anglophone, 20%. And what they call Francophones, the Cameroon Republic, are 80%. When anybody starts a discussion on that premise, know that it is already tilted. You cannot win. As a minority, you can never win. And they will tell you that it's democratic enough that the majority will carry the day. And that if we have to, there's something which we have to listen, we only listen to you, that's all. It's a minority will listen. But we're not bound to take their views. We are just a minority. And that's why French Cameroon has been able to say that we cannot dictate to them, what they call dictating, we cannot dictate to them, we can't impose on them, we can't tell them how to organize their society. We can't tell them what constitution they need to frame. And that's because you're a minority. And that this minority issue sprung up for us only after 1972. During the federal system, you would never hear people saying, oh, West Cameroon minority, whatever thing. The writers may point out, but it was not there in the common discourse for the simple reason that in every federation, the federated states are not demographically the same. And they are not also in terms of population and in terms of size, they are not the same. So why would you start calling some people that are a minority in that federation? You can't. So this whole discourse about minority came out of 72. And why did it come out 72? Why did it come out so strongly? Why is that Cameroon Republic always reminds us that what they're saying in effect that you are a nobody. In this arrangement here, you are nobody. If we give you something, it's a matter of grace. Just because we want to. You have no entitlement here. You are just a small minority. And so one of the ministers was able to dismiss the protest by our people by saying, you are just two small cubes of sugar. You can easily be melted in water. That's what he said. Who are you even? What have you got even? So a minority status is a very, very bad situation. That is something which I always oppose. Never you call ambassadors a minority. Minority in comparison to what? Everybody is a minority in relation to some other thing, or to some other person, or some other territory. Surely, if we were to compare Cameroon Republic with Nigeria, for example, it's a minority. So why do you go into all of that? So for me, I don't even accept that kind of a logic. Now, the other issue you raised was in relation to territorial integrity. Like I said, when international law, specifically when the African Union talks about the territorial integrity, it is referring to the territory which a state had on the date of its achievement of independence. That is a territory you have. You can't lay claim to any other territory. You cannot. If a subsequent modification, it must be by law, international law, and then there will be border adjustment. I'll give a clear example. The borders of Nigeria, for example, became frozen on the 1st of October 1961 when they achieved independence. But there was a subsequent modification of that border as a result of the Northern Cameroon deciding, and this is sometimes people don't see this thing, deciding to integrate as part of Nigeria. That is the offer that what Nigeria made to them during the plebiscite, and they accepted that offer. We are going to be part of Nigeria. And so the border was adjusted to include. So the picture of Nigeria's territory is no longer, if you look at it, is no longer on the 1st of October 1960, but on the 1st of June 1961. There you captured Nigeria's territory at that particular point. And there were treaties that were signed, entered into between the government of Nigeria and the British. And the British were very, very clear that we are saying with this agreement that as of 1st of June, we regard Northern Cameroon as part of the territory of Nigeria, and Nigeria should make a constitutional adjustment to welcome the Northern Cameroon into the Federation of Nigeria. The treaties are there. You don't have a comparable situation with regards to us and Cameroon Republic. There's no such comparable situation. So Cameroon Republic must respect the sanctity of its borders as it existed on the day it achieved independence from France. There has been no other arrangement. After the plebiscite, there was no treaty signed between the British and France or Cameroon Republic saying, we recognize the Southern Cameroon as now part of the territory of Cameroon Republic, and therefore admit the Southern Cameroon as into Cameroon Republic. And they could never have been. Because if you look at the history of all of those things, the arrangements, the agreements which the Southern Cameroon entered into and entered with the Cameroon Republic clearly was in the federation. And anybody who talks about a federation, you are talking about the coexistence side by side of states. It's not a question of some state integrating into another state. That is no longer a federation. That should be an absorption. It's not a federation. So people must have this very, very clear in their mind now. This whole thing is clear. And I believe even the lawyers on that side, Cameroon Republic, I do understand these things. But for political reasons, they want to promote the fiction, the lie that Ambazonia, after 11th of February 1960, became part of French Cameroon. I've always asked, and I'm yet to see somebody produce the evidence. There's none. And I know of no international organization that has recognized, adopted a resolution. I know of no parliament in the world, and I know of no government in the world that has come out with an agreement, with a resolution saying Ambazonia is part of the territory of Cameroon Republic. They cannot even do that.
Thank you so much, Professor Anyangwe. I want to also thank Magikilo. We want to move on to the next segment to pose questions on the outcome. What are the consequences ongoing of this struggle? Let me call on our next speaker who will pose questions. I want to give 20 minutes to this segment. Please. Okay, Judith, please, can you unmute, please?
Yes, thank you. I couldn't unmute.
Okay.
Yes. Thanks, Professor Falola, for organizing this, and it's really an opportunity to get some issues clarified. And dear Prof. Anyangwe, it's a pleasure for me to have this opportunity to chat with you. I will break down my conversation with you into 5 topics, and will be quick based on time constraints. So I'm going to bring up the humanitarian situation, the human rights situation, tolerance, responsible leadership, and international recognition. So I'm going to start with the humanitarian situation. I'll just give a brief, and then with a series of questions that I think you will just group them together. As of May this year, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, that's OCHA, reported grim numbers. 2.2 million people affected, 712,000 internally displaced, 67,000 refugees in Nigeria. Bear in mind, these numbers only reflect people who have bothered to register with the authorities. Many more are in the bushes or too afraid to come forward. This is a dire situation, especially with villages burned, houses razed to the ground, and healthcare and educational facilities shut down or not working. This is a huge burden on the population for the common man on the street. This is not sustainable. I don't believe the population was prepared for this outcome.
Correct.
So few questions on this. Did the frontline groups foresee this, and how prepared were they for this? What resources are the frontline groups and leaders putting in place to alleviate the sufferings of the people? Are the frontline groups collaborating with international non-governmental organizations and helping to work with the armed groups to allow humanitarian access? What is the current situation on school closures?
Okay.
Back to you.
Thank you, Judith. You've described a very dire situation there, and you therefore can understand why we've been insisting on many things, on ceasefire, intervention, and all of that, and so on. Nobody will be left indifferent, that kind of situation. And as you say, the statistics there are even just partial, not full. Was this situation foreseeable? Was the leadership prepared? Answer is no. Remember, you recall that this thing was thrust on the people of Ambazonia. They were never prepared for it. War was never in the contemplation of anybody at all. But never. And I think the thinking was that, well, we'll do a protest and like a civilized society, which we presume the Cameroon Republic was, and we should have known that they are not, they will listen and then have this thing resolved. But unfortunately, it never happened that way. The response to that was the use of deadly force, violence, murder of people, killing, not just one or two people, the young, the old, the elderly, the children, and so on and so forth. And the unleashing of war made matters worse. We're not prepared for war. We didn't have one single soldier, nothing, and so on. So we're completely taken unawares in all of this. And so when that happened, if we're in a normal situation where you have in other liberation movements where they prepare that look, we're going to take on the colonizer, they organize themselves, they have a movement, and they get some training, and they try to get some backing ideologically from some power and so on, then all of us you can say, well, we are going to do this thing, or we're going to launch a liberation movement. And therefore, what may likely happen would be A, B, C, and D, and so on. But this is not what happened in our own situation. There was no preparation. There was no liberation movement that was created anywhere. There was no soldier, there was nothing. So this thing came like a bolt. But having suffered the initial shock, the people had to reorganize themselves and say, look, we can't let this situation. And so therefore, comes the second limb of the question, which is that of resources, saying, look, this is what has happened. We therefore must organize ourselves and make sure we have resources, things, doesn't matter how small it is, to look after refugees, see a way which can alleviate the suffering of the internally displaced persons, and so on. And I must say, for people that were never prepared for anything like this, and for people who, as you know, the generality of our people are not wealthy people. I've always teased people and said, tell me one single ambassador you can go to knock at the door and say, give me $50 million. There's not one, not a single one. That's to show the level of our pauperization, the way we've been made poor. So efforts were made to try to help. Not to help, and it's now a matter of obligation, not helping. People who are in the refugee camps, as you say. Of course, the first call was to get the UN that assumes responsibility in this whole thing to get involved in it. Because first of all, they have expertise, they are well connected, and they've had experience in this thing all over the world. Extend that experience to our people so they also could benefit from that. So that is what, in my view, happened in terms of resources. And to be fair, I think they've done a commendable job. At one point, I went to some refugee camps, and I saw myself the efforts that were going on. And I'm so impressed by a number, especially of our female compatriots, the wonderful job they are doing there for the refugees, and the efforts they are deploying there, which is very, very good. And for me, I think it is something which we need to continue. The third aspect, collaboration with outsiders. To the best of my knowledge and belief, efforts have been made to reach out to relevant, appropriate bodies that could give one form of assistance to another, not just in relation to the refugees and not just in relation to internally displaced person, but also to alleviate suffering on the ground, on ground zero, and to make sure that even as the war goes on, people have their homes burnt, villages have been burnt, hundreds, we're talking about hundreds of these things, homes and villages burnt, and also the treatment of those who have managed to survive after being attacked and killed. And this effort, sometimes, and I think you have to, and I do understand some initial hesitation because of suspicion, that in some instances, there's some suspicion we needed to overcome before people can be comfortable and say, okay, fine, we need some international outsiders to come and provide this assistance. But once that hurdle has been cleared, and that idea of suspicion has been allayed, and I think there has been collaboration in that respect. Of course, there's still a lot that needs to be done in that respect. There are still, and I'm aware that they still talk with some other organization, referring here specifically to one limb of the UN system that says they want to go down there and provide help. The problem has been trying to ascertain what exactly they want to do. Because we take the view that you can't talk about rebuilding, reconstruction, when the war is ongoing and destruction is going on. So once you can clarify what the concept of reconstruction means, and I think, in my view, that the relevant organization go ahead with this because of that initial suspicion that was there. You said the current, I think the current, what I get that when I just unmute.
Okay, sorry, the host was not allowing me to unmute, but now I can.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
So no, the last question on that one was about school closures. Where are we today?
Oh, yes, sorry, yes, yeah, thank you, yes. What's the current position of school closure? The current position, as far as I'm aware, is that parents are free to send their children to school wherever they want and however they want. But making it clear that they assume responsibility, whatever happens to their children when they send to those schools and so on. And this is informed by the fact that we've seen situations where parents have, I don't want to recall the Kumba situation, send their children to school, and certain things have happened. It need not only be death. And I'm sure you are aware of reports that came of how many hundred all of a sudden they found in one, well, let's call it a division of girls who were pregnant through rape by these military forces. So those are the kind of things we have thought we could initially try to avoid and so on, but it hasn't worked. A lot of pressure, okay, children should send to school. So we say, fine, let children go to school. And indeed, they are going to school. They are. There are schools that are open. And in some areas, I'm aware too, that some people have tried to set up community schools, especially areas where schools have been burned down. And especially in places where distances to school is so far and parents are afraid. You don't want the child getting in the morning, walking to how many kilometers to go to school. So they try to organize themselves to have schools much more nearer home, where in the event of anything, parents can rush and try to get their children back and the children can run home and so on. That I'm aware of that. Thank you.
Okay. So the next question, it's on human rights abuses. I know this is a thorny subject, but I think we all have to face the music.
Yes, indeed.
And I am sorry to be the bearer of the question, but I think on a personal note, I have to ask.
Yes.
There's been accusations of human rights abuses committed by both sides of the conflict, and we need to accept that. We all agree the responsibility to protect the population lies with the government, and that the non-state armed groups took up arms in self-defense, but that does not excuse any form of abuse. So with reports of abductions, kidnappings, rape, and killings, what are the frontline groups doing to curb these infractions?
First thing you must realize is that we are in a situation where the territory concerned is under belligerent occupation. There's a force that is in occupation. There's a force, there's a power that is in occupation. There's a power that is administering the territory. There's a power that under international law is responsible for the civilian population for all their needs and so on. So that's the first one must bear in mind. And that occupying power must bear a responsibility in that regard. That said, the point you make is absolutely correct. there are human rights abuses being perpetrated, not only by the occupying forces, but also by some freedom fighters. Now, that must be qualified, because sometimes it becomes very, very difficult to know whether they are true freedom fighters who committed those atrocities, or they are just groups that have been set up to do that. And we know very well that is one fighting strategy we all colonial authorities have. The French use it very much in Algeria when they're fighting the Algerians. They set up groups, use other Algerians, set them group up, perpetrate crimes, and blame it on the Algerian National Liberation Front. And this has been used also in other countries when the colonial authorities do that. So we are aware of that, we know that. That being the case, and given the difficulty of trying to distinguish who is who in this whole thing, we believe, and we've made it very, very clear, and I think the leadership has come out to say so, condemning all those acts, at least from our side, and say that this is unworthy of our freedom fighters. We can't say we are fighting for freedom and at the same time causing all this kind of horror to our own people. That statement has come out not once, not twice, but thrice. Now, the problem, of course, is operationalizing it on the ground. But that presupposes that the leadership has full authority to operate on the ground and do whatever it wants to do to stop all of this whole thing, which, as you know, is not possible because territory is under belligerent occupation. There's an occupying power that is there. And because of all these difficulties, we have consistently invited, called upon the United Nations that they must send in, or they should send in, a team of investigators to go and probe the commission of atrocities in the territory of Ambazonia since 2016. Whoever is found guilty, if freedom fighters are found guilty, we have no problem with that. If they have to defer to the ICC, fine. If there are Cameroon Republic forces who are guilty of that, and if Cameroon Republic is not afraid of it, it shouldn't be afraid of any investigation. That has been our call, and we still make that call, that the investigator should go down there and carry out this investigation. That is the only way we will know who is who has done what, and what the level of crimes they've committed. Thank you. Is there something I missed?
Yes.
I missed
no, that's fine. I was going up because I keep being muted, so I need to unmute myself. So my next question is on tolerance. There's this phenomenon where any Southern Cameroonian or someone who doesn't want to fall under the umbrella of Ambazonia, or any Anglophone who does not believe in Ambazonia is seen as the enemy within, is termed a blackleg, a traitor, and is treated with abuse, social media trolling, threats, and sometimes even death. How can the leaders convince the world that Ambazonia will be a tolerant society where different views are welcomed? Will some people become marginalized or threatened within the new Ambazonia because of their own views?
No, I don't think so. And I think in a sense, it's unfair to judge the future society we want to build by what is happening now. In many countries that have had the same experience like we have, or we're having, they've had the same thing. And it is not because of certain of those experiences during the wartime that you think it's going to happen in the post liberation period. Indeed, the things you describe, I mean, tolerance is one of the virtues which we pride ourselves in as part of our culture. Now, do you remember? That's why we had a multi-party system. And we have a culture of challenging authority. We have that culture. We have a culture of demonstrating. We have that culture. So I'll be very, very surprised if after liberation, you try to suppress dissenting views. No society ever grows without dissent. Because it's through having dissenting views that you're able to see yourself. Because without those views, you go unhappy, you think that you're fine. But the dissenting views come and you realize that, well, you see, maybe I didn't get things correctly here, and you're helped in that way. But I must emphasize that the expression of dissent must be responsibly done. And to the best of my knowledge and belief, at least from what I know, I'm not aware that the people I know would go out to say, just because you express a dissenting view, just because you do not align the liberation struggle, you are necessarily an enemy. What I've heard people say, the term enabler being used, a collaboration is being used, precisely that it is not because you say, I don't want to get involved in this liberation struggle, I take a different view. The problem comes when you now desire to actively get involved against the liberation struggle. And at that moment, they call you an enabler, a collaborationist. There are thousands and thousands of people who perhaps don't believe in liberation for one reason or another. And they stay quiet, they keep their views. But they don't go out to say, well, I don't believe in it, and therefore I'll destroy your own belief. So that's why those people, of course, will be called enablers. So I will be the very last person to encourage pursuing people just because of perceived views and so on. And I want to reassure the viewers and the international community that as far as I'm concerned, I'm speaking to myself, and I cannot purport to be speaking for, for the whole district. I don't think it will be proper to try to suppress people, their views. And if you want to know, Judith, one of the things, and I've expressed this view to many people, one of the very first things I would like to see in Ambazonia is a very active civil society.
But we saw it in the Hutu Tutsi crisis, how those who disagree within their group were macheted to death. So in that big crisis, if you are Hutu and you made words of caution, you're going to lose your life. So I understand where Judith is going, and there must also be a need to protect, not only to encourage dissent, but to also protect the lives of those who disagree.
I agree. That's why for me, I said, I'll encourage actively civil society. I know what civil society have done in countries I'm visited and where I am. And many of the achievements have been because of a very, very active civil society. Without that, frankly, the government will just go to sleep and do what they want to do. So I was just saying one aspect of the thing for me to show that I would like to see that happen. And that civil society, of course, will have to be protected constitutionally. It's not just saying that how to be protected constitutionally, not even by ordinary law, but constitutionally. So he can carry on his activities without fear or favor from any quarters.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I hope I still have time. The next question is on responsible leadership. There are some within the international community who actually sympathize with the Southern Cameroonian cause, and they understand their plight. They understand the history of Ambazonia and the marginalization. However, looking at the war situation, at the current Ambazonia leadership and the way the struggle has been executed and managed so far, with different factions even fighting each other, this is actually throwing doubt in some minds about whether the current leadership has what it takes to run a free and stable Ambazonia. What do you have to say to such people? Do you think the leaders are ready and capable of managing and leading a free and fair country?
In a sense, it is in a sense very unfair to judge future leadership in Ambazonia from what is happening now. That presupposes that those we identify as leaders now are necessarily going to be the ones to run the affairs there. It might not be the case. It might be, it might not be the case. I'm not too sure. I don't know. I'm not God.
We don't know. We are going with what we have.
Crystal ball.
All right. We are going with what we have, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm saying, if I could crystal gaze or to consult an Ezemo or a Dibia, I will do so to be able to determine whether this person here is going to make a good leader or not, and then say perhaps we should just say no, he can't be a leader. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And I'm saying that our friends outside must try to bear with us. Like I said, we're never prepared for this whole thing. If you look at other organizations that fought liberation wars, they prepared and they selected leadership. You had a political wing, you had a military wing, and the political wing was well structured. You had a military wing was well structured with a straight command team. So you had control over everybody. You know that, and so on. We're never prepared. We're never prepared for that. And so that created a lot of problem for us. And leadership emerged in the circumstances and have been trying as much as they can to do what they can. So I want to reassure, speaking for myself, remember, I do not purport to speak for the whole of Bazione. I can always express my personal view on where I stand, that a little bit of tolerance is needed. If it's possible for us to go to a shop that sells leadership, good leadership, we'll go there and buy that good leadership and say, fine. But also remember that we have to learn as we go along. And this is all part of the learning curve for liberation in our system situation. Some of those leaders you're talking about have learned their lessons, they're making amends, they have changes, and so on and so forth. Maybe by the time we get there, they will not be the same kind of characters we are seeing now. I don't know. Some perhaps will not even learn. They will persist with their bad character. I don't know. But I think we should give them a little bit of a chance, and our friends should try to bear with us. We're aware of this kind of a situation. The thing is, we don't want to start opening up problem and issue now by saying X is not good enough. So it's not. So what do you want? Somebody will say election. Election, as you very know, is going to create more problems than anything else. So we just have to keep on talking. And I'll just plead that our friends who say this is good to identify and help us identify, okay, this is what the leadership is doing. This aspect of it, they should fine-tune it or should do it and so on and so forth. That's helping us. Exactly. So we can then move forward on that respect. The global condemnation will not help them. And in fact, in some cases, may even provoke some of them to behave even worse.
Let me bring in Nigeria to this overall outcome.
Okay.
During the Nigerian Civil War, Aidjo was in power.
Yes.
And Biafra, doing some of what you are doing now, realized that Aidjo will not support them. As part of the outcome, Nigeria is dealing with asylum, complicated interregional trade, even policing the borders. Some of the stories are very horrifying. And Buhari is not supportive of your movement. Last week, Aso Rock made it very clear that they're not going to support your movement. And on one occasion with Chief Fonkem, we had the privilege of calling the office of the Vice President of Nigeria. So with that kind of orientation and lack of sympathy from Nigeria, what do you think Nigeria would do with some of your people fleeing to Nigeria as part of the overall outcome of this crisis?
Okay, first thing I want to say is that we never had any illusion at all about the position of the Buhari regime. We knew, we've always known, for reasons which, of course, I think you yourself know, but which we need not discuss here. We are privy to certain kinds of information which I would not say openly here. So we knew. And one manifestation of that, it was the terrorist-like hijacking of the leadership that was in Nigeria. And that's part of the thing that has actually broken us. And taking them, like thrown them into a cargo military district, back to Cameroon, where we were tortured for 1 year. And a so-called military court gave them life imprisonment and paid and required to pay the equivalent of Cameroon's budget for the next 10 years. Ridiculous. But those are the kind of things they do. So we have no illusions about that. We've never had any illusions. So this recent thing about us for having said so is not new to us and so on. As for refugees who are there, that is beyond us. What Nigeria does, we face the international community with that. There's a law, there's a protocol, there's a treaty, which Nigeria is a party to, the African Refugee Convention, International Refugee Convention. So they have to respect that. My concern is not for the refugees. Refugees, in my view, will get that protection from the UN system. But if by your question are referring to perhaps some of Ambazonians who are living in Nigeria and working there, well, I don't know what they'll ever do. Any government is free to do whatever they do, and then of course face the consequences later. The good thing about some of these things is that no government is permanent. They're always changing. We have a new situation that may come tomorrow, and so on. So we have that. The Biafran Ahijo thing, which you mentioned, I think the whole thing is so interesting because much as Ahijo did not support Biafra, France supported Biafra to the hilt, provided arms, provided diplomatic support, nudged French-speaking countries like Haiti, like Gabon, to support Biafra and give diplomatic recognition to Biafra. So Biafra was a much more better position, in spite of what Ahijo was doing, than anything else. And by the way, Prof, again, let me tell you something which, part of the problem which we have as a people with Cameroon Republic is that during the Biafran War, that was the time of the Federation, the sympathy in Ambazonia was for Biafra. So while Ahijo up at level of federal government was making that, the Federated State of West Cameroon sympathy was with Biafra. And a lot of them were welcomed into West Cameroon. So these things have a certain dynamic which goes on and on and on and on and so on. So the issue you talk about support, this is what I was just saying, that we were not prepared for this business. It was thrust upon us. We had to make do with what we have. If we were prepared like other liberation movements were prepared, we would have first of all sent feelers around different countries and try to sound and say, okay, we are setting up a liberation movement. We are sick and tired of what is happening. We want to liberate ourselves. Perhaps we need your support, this kind of support, and so on and so forth. We may have at that time one or two countries that may prepare to say, okay, we'll throw our weight behind you and go ahead. And when that happens, we have that support that will come in. That is what happened in all of Africa when they're fighting for liberation. And those days were much easier because all you needed to do was to declare that you are pro-communist or you are pro-capitalist. If you say you are pro-communist, you had the Chinese and the Russians on their side. If you say you have capitalism, you had America and the West on their side. And they will supply you arms. This is what I will supply arms for this other side. They will do that. We are in a much more trickier position now, given the collapse of the Cold War. But we still have done that homework. And then sounded opinion are new. As you well know, we're in a dire situation now, where it is very, very difficult to have even things to support our refugees and internally displaced persons. No talk of even fighting. You are aware that our boys started fighting with knives and sticks. That's all they had. Everybody went to their father's house, got some old den gun they used for hunting. That's what they had. And these guns that you put in with powder, you shoot. If you explode, it kills you or kills other person. That's what they started with. And much of what you see they're having now have been captured from the enemy.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one last question.
Yes, before you. One second.
Yes.
So there is an interest in this program. I just checked on 7 platforms. We have close to 13,000 people who are now watching this live.
Oh, good. Excellent.
So there's a lot of interest in what is going on both sides. I do not know the sides that the audience is taking.
Yeah, Judith.
One last question, Judith, please.
Yes. So for international recognition, this is my last question. Prof, there is a divergence of opinion as to whether the international community actually grants anyone independence. Such wars drag on sometimes for decades with massive loss of lives and bloodshed before the international community intervenes. This situation has led to some Ambazonians, aka Southern Cameroonians, suggesting we ignore the international community out of vexation about the lack of meaningful intervention from the international community. What role does the international community actually play in the quest for independence? Can a nation be formed in isolation, or isn't there a process for a new state or country to be recognized by the international community? Where is Ambazonia in that process? And is the general population aware of that process and how long that can take?
Wow. That is a very loaded question. Yeah, Judith. No, the first thing I said, no. You cannot ignore what they call the international community. I mean, it's a whole dispute about that, whether there's something like international community or not. But whatever thing it is, you cannot ignore it. But the saying that you can't ignore the international community doesn't mean that you submit yourself to the dictates of the international community. You know, by that, if you mean the United Nations. Our people did that in 5960 and they found themselves on the wrong side. So no international community, so to speak, or organization grants independence. The UN will not come and say, oh, okay, we'll grant you independence. The AU will not come and say, we'll grant you independence. No, it never happens that way. What international law does, it sends the criteria for statehood: territory, population, government, ability to enter into international relations with other countries. Criteria of statehood. Once it's said that, that is it. If we fulfill those criteria, it is for each individual state to make a pronouncement on that, recognize or not recognize. There is no duty under international law for a state or even an intergovernmental organization to recognize any entity as a state. There's none. It's an optional thing. And recognition, to use the legal phrase, which we often use, once you fulfill those conditions of statehood, recognition is simply cognitive. In other words, you simply recognize what it exists. So once a state or an entity fulfills the conditions for statehood, that is it. It exists. Whether it is recognized or it is not recognized, it is immaterial. Recognition only gives that entity the ability to be able to act with a recognizing state. We say, okay, we can establish diplomatic relations and deal with others and so on and so forth. We have a situation. I'll give you a few examples. You all know China, for example, was not recognized by many countries, even the United Nations, for a long time. Peking's China. And people instead maintained the fiction that it was Taiwan. It was late in the 70s. The countries started recognizing China and so on. You have a situation now, a very awkward situation now, which we have with Taiwan, right? Many countries do not recognize Taiwan. That has not prevented Taiwan from existing. It still exists, an entity. It still exists. And it is still carrying a relationship with a number of countries. It might not be at diplomatic level, but at various levels, maybe at trade level, or cultural level, at different levels, or even parliamentary levels. We have a very peculiar situation in Africa, and I'm referring here to the question of Somaliland.
Somaliland, yeah.
Yes. For 30 years, Somaliland has been existing, managing its affairs peacefully, conducting elections peacefully, running its affairs, has its military, has everything you can think of a state, far better than many countries that are states. anyway. And yet, we have a fiction that's on now, that is now recognized. And I would suggest that the non-recognition of Somaliland is a form of international outlawry, but which to me is unjust, it's unfair. For a country that's performing more than many, many countries that are, which are recognized. However, the non-recognition is simply a symbolic rather than a practical significance. Because as you might well know, Somaliland has a relationship with a number of states. As I said, trade relationship, cultural relationship, exchange relationship. They even have what do you call them? Some form of diplomatic representation. They often like to hide, states like to hide, they don't want that to come out, and so on. So the thing to bear in mind is that when people talk about recognition, you cannot force a country to recognize an entity. No country is going to recognize it. Not even the UN, that would give you, because intergovernmental organization might give you what we call collective recognition. If the UN admits it to its membership, that is collective recognition. You recognize. If the AU admits it to its membership, it gives you collective recognition. You recall the case of Western Sahara, which is very, very anomalous. It's a member of the AU. It recognized by a number of states. The UN is still considering it as what? As a colonial territory, still to be decolonized. Very, very interesting. So in our case, the two things must be distinguished. When we fulfill the conditions of statehood, whether we are recognized or not is one whole different paradigm. It's a different thing. There are entities that need not have fulfilled that and are given recognition as such by some countries, because this is simply a political act. A country may tactically or strategically decide to recognize an entity for whatever reason it wants. But we're talking here of recognition of states, recognition of government, or even recognition of a national liberation movement. These are, again, different categories of recognition. They mean different things. Yes. Okay.
So just to conclude then, where are we, where is Ambazonia in that process, and what have you achieved? What has Ambazonia achieved? Is it state recognition? Is it the People's Liberation recognition? Is it, where is Ambazonia in that process? And like I said, the last question. So people who are following and people who have a vested interest in this, right? So they have an idea of where Ambazonia is and where Ambazonia is going to be in the next year, next 5 years. Any ideas?
Yeah, the ultimate thing, of course, is to get state recognition. Having status of recognized as a national liberation movement will give you certain rights in the prosecution of the war under international humanitarian law, either as a non-international armed conflict or an international armed conflict. But that's a different thing. As I said, what is of more direct interest is that of recognition of state. But as I said, that will come once you fulfill, that's the first thing, fulfill the conditions of statehood. At the moment, you have to have territory. We have territory. There's no doubt about that. But having territory without control over that territory it's quite tricky. So if you have the territory, you have to assert control over that territory. We have to have the territory, we have the population. So we need to assert control over it. And asserting control over it means that you have the government. Only then can you profitably begin to expect or canvass for that recognition. Because right now, personally, I don't see which state is actually going to do that when these things are not being fulfilled. The only situation that arises is wartime recognition. And that's the recognition of government, where a particular government moves because it has been occupied, as happened during the Second World War. Haile Selassie escaped from Ethiopia. The whole government of Norway escaped, went to UK. De Gaulle himself was a refugee in the UK, escaped from France. But they were recognized. De Gaulle, free, whatever, recognized the government of France. So you already had a recognized government there. You had a territory, you have the population. So that made things very, very easy, and so on and so forth. But that's a different category of recognition completely. So the straight answer is to say it's perhaps premature for us now to talk about state recognition right now. All we need to do is to actualize the liberation, get control of the territory. And the actualization can come through the processes which I think you mentioned indirectly. Either you throw away the enemy occupier, or you negotiate. And many people think the easiest way is, of course, is to engage in the process of negotiation with the enemy and talk and see them, to see reason. That it's better for people to be separate, independent countries and live as good neighbors, principle of good neighborliness, than to exacerbate a situation where you perpetually be at war.
Thank you so much, Judith Mwana, Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations. We appreciate all your questions. We want to move to the last segment of the dialogue because we have to allow members of the audience to also pose questions. And I will call on Dennis Atenkeng to anchor this. While waiting for Dennis, I want to ask the first question. How many countries should Africa have? In my own country of Nigeria, the Yoruba want to create the Yoruba Republic, Biafra Republic. So how many countries are we going to have if all these secessions keep going on? Atenkeng, we are waiting you. Please answer my question to start this conversation.
I think there is no predetermined number of countries for any regional organization, for any region. A few years ago, if you ask that question for Europe, they would have told you, oh, no. You know how many countries Europe has split into in the past 20 years? You know? And it's not an end. There are more still to come in Europe. I'm talking about Europe. So you can't put a limit. And this is what I was saying. I'm talking about the world developing through a process of fission rather than fusion. Very few countries today are interested in fusion because the example that we've seen from other arrangements have been very, very bad, very, very bad. The only encouraging example is that of the United States of America and Tanzania, which is we're talking about Africa. And the reason why Tanzania is holding on is very, very clear. If you look at Tanganyika and Zanzibar, Zanzibar is just like a small point in a drop in Tanganyika. And there was a time the Tanganyikans were insisting that the Zanzibars are too small in terms of size and even population. They shouldn't come and be dictated to them. The same kind of language usually had the French Cameroon talking to us. Come on, dictate to them and so on and so forth. They too must have their own government there in mainland Tanzania and all of this. Nyerere told them, my brothers, listen to me. You must be wise. You don't want to give the impression that you are a new colonial master that has come into play. And so therefore, you must accept this arrangement of made, constitutional arrangement. When one president is from mainland, the next one will have to come from the other side, and so on. And that arrangement has worked very well. And you might be interested to know, Prof, that Zanzibar, if you go there, still has his own president of Zanzibar. If you go to the Zanzibar, any office, you find, if you call the national president, the photograph is there. Then also find that of president of Zanzibar is also there. And they vote for the president. Tanganyika is less worried about all of that. That's the arrangement. And that has made the Zanzibaris to feel comfortable. And they've been able to feel a sense of a national identification with that. That's what has made it move. Compare that with, say, Senegambia, where the attitude of the Senegalese was exactly the attitude of Cameroon Republic. They were going to grab, impose their gendarmes, impose their laws, impose everything. And by the way, the Senegalese and the Gambians are of the same ethnicity. They speak the same language. And for decades, Gambia never had a television. They were simply watching television from Senegal, which was in Wolof, which they don't understand. That's a language. And yet, when they had tried to have this thing, and the Senegalese trying to impose, assimilate, just like the Cameroon Republic tried to do, the Gambians say, no. You stay with this thing. I remember very well, I went to Senegal, to Gambia at that time, and I asked that question. I said, but you people speak the same language, you have the same ethnicity. But how come this arrangement did not work? You know what his reply was? The day they woke up and saw their street full with gendarmes, they just said, no, they can't stand this anymore. That was the end of the whole thing. That was all of the arrangements. So these days, you are not going to have countries willing to come together. It's very, very rare, very rare. I've not seen any agenda of people coming together. Instead, it's a process of separating, fission, whether in Africa or in Europe or in Asia, because that's part of exercising your right to self-determination, which nobody can stop. So you can't put a limit to say, oh, in Africa, there must only be just this number of states, and there the box is closed. Nobody else can listen. That will be very, very oppressive. You can't lock people in border which they didn't take part in crafting. You are imprisoning them. And the people crave now to get out of that prison. So I understand the Ododowa Republic. I understand the Biafran Republic. I understand even the people in the Midwest. I understand even the House of Fulani who are saying they intend to keep the name Nigeria for their own country. That's fine. That is fine. You know, the world evolves that way.
Professor,
yeah, I think Dennis is on. Let him.
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Prof. Before I begin my questions, let me just say that if we look at the world, the more peaceful states are the smaller states. And the number of states in the world has never ceased to increase, and they will never cease to increase. So there's no possibility by which you will prevent children from growing, because most of these states were formed without the consent of those who are part of them. And therefore, when they grow, they acquire intellectual capacity, they acquire financial capacity, they will challenge what is happening to them. And there's no way you can prevent that. I think the future of the world is for smaller states. Let me say so. So, Prof, I have a number of questions. Let me not say questions, but in some cases, I will just raise a subject that I want us to discuss and for you to articulate it in order to enlighten the world about our case. I want to shift a little bit to the international community so that we can fully look at how the international community has addressed this matter. Let me begin with the question of how the international community so far has looked at this conflict. Many international actors persist in regarding this conflict between the two Cameroons as an internal affair of La République du Cameroun. Now, I want you to take some time. I know you have mentioned this in your introductory remarks, but I want you to take some time to explain to the international community why this matter is not an internal affair of La République du Cameroun.
Okay. I think most of our friends, international actors, some of them say this thing as a result of mere mimicry. They haven't taken the trouble to actually study the situation and look at the history and determine for themselves. They simply repeat what some other person has said, or they've read something here and so on and so forth, for some of them. But others, of course, are knowingly, purposefully trying to deceive, mislead, sorry. The reason why that thesis cannot hold is because we're two distinct peoples and two distinct territories. That must be made very, very clear. The territory of Ambazonia was not carved out of the territory of Cameroon Republic. The territory of Ambazonia was not determined by Cameroon Republic. The territory of Ambazonia is well secured by boundary treaties. And once you've had a treaty defining with boundaries that are even demarcated, you can change them. You can always change them consensually. But as far as I'm aware of, there has been no agreement between the people of Ambazonia and the people of Cameroon for the change of the territory. During the Federation, I think where people are coming from. During the Federation, the boundary between Ambazonia and Cameroon Republic had merely presumptive internal, as an internal boundary. I said presumptively, because that boundary never changed and remained an international boundary supported by international treaties. It never changed. But because as a result of the Federation, it appeared as an internal boundary. Furthermore, it appeared as internal, it could not exist as a boundary in time because at the UN during the voting for the Federation, Cameroon Republic cast a negative vote, objected to the federating. In law, that means that it insisted that the boundary remained the same as it was. So people, friends outside must understand that we're dealing here with two different territories. The territory of Cameroon Republic, with its clear boundaries, two different people, people of Ambazonia and people of Cameroon Republic, each of them having grown up, brought up by two different powers, two different cultures. Admittedly, there was in 1961 a political association in terms of a federation. But the federation did not change the fact that we are talking about two territories. If you look at Article 1 of the Federal Constitution, it says clearly that the Federal Republic of Cameroon is constituted from two territories. The territory of the Southern Cameroons, hereinafter known as West Cameroon, and the territory of La République du Cameroun, hereinafter known as East Cameroon. The 1972 thing did not change that at all, didn't change it. Because the 1972 Constitution, Article 1 still said the same thing, that the Federal Republic of Cameroon is now known as what? The United Republic of Cameroon. So if you want to know what the United Republic of Cameroon is, you must go back to the Federal Republic of Cameroon. And when you go back and look at what the Federal Republic of Cameroon, it tells you that the Federal Republic of Cameroon was made up of two separate and distinct territories. So even the United Republic of Cameroon was made of two different distinct territories. And when the moment you talk about united in any arrangement, state arrangement, country arrangement, you are talking about a plurality of territories. United Kingdom, United Arab Emirates, United States of America, United Republic of Tanzania. It's always a plurality of states. I would suggest that this is what Bimbia tried to cancel out in that 1982 business by saying, reviving, conjuring up Cameroon Republic, thinking that by doing that automatically eliminates Ambazonia as a people and as a territory. That doesn't work. So our friends must understand. When they understand it, then they'll easily appreciate where we are coming from and why we're saying that Bia's attempt was simply trying to annex our people. An attempt is to steal territory which does not belong to them, and that the interest in Ambazonia is simply because of the resources. That's what they want.
Thank you, Prof. As you know, since this war began, it is the Western powers that have shown some concern and interest in the war. However, no Western actor has used the word justice, rule of law, respect for UN principles, international law, or even respect for African Union principles since this war began. Yeah. And you know that this position is what is encouraging Cameroon to believe that the international community recognizes its claims over Ambazonia. And so it tends to perpetuate the war and encourage Cameroon to continue to do violence. Now, is there any way this conflict can be resolved by ignoring the very rules that all of mankind has laid down for the peaceful resolution of conflicts?
You are spot on. And I've had occasion to say that unwittingly, these international actors are actually fueling this war and encouraging President Biya to keep on killing. Because if they are taking into account the things you've just said, this would have ended a long time ago and tell Biya, no. You must respect international law. Do what international law says. You say you're in Africa, but Africa, talks about the sanctity of borders on the day of achievement of independence. Your borders are independent, do not include the territory of Amazonia. So what claim are you talking about? This thing would have been resolved. But by continuing to bypass this, refusing to address that issue, they are indirectly fueling this crisis, the killings, and so on, and make themselves complicit in the killing, in the assassinations, and the genocide. Of course, tomorrow they might come to say, well, we apologize, and so on and so forth. But that's what is happening. So I just hope that at some time, more reading and more awareness will be raised. Maybe it's our responsibility to raise that awareness, and perhaps at this conversation here, the points you made, they will then realize that perhaps we are taking a wrong position before, and then change. And that will begin to see some changes coming. And by the way, it is precisely because some of these international actors keep on making that what I call a mistake, that Cameroon Republic is not prepared even for dialogue, as we're talking about. If everything shows that they have said, and we've had friends in the arrangement who said, they've said they have no interest in going for any dialogue at all, or any negotiation. For them, it's war throughout. And they say they have the machine to do the killing, and they have the money. The international committee will provide them the money and provide them cover. They are not even afraid of crimes because they look on the international community to cover them up for their crimes. So this is most unfortunate, the most unfortunate situation. I sometimes add the view that if this kind of thing were happening, say, in Europe, this thing would have been long-term resolved. In which case, I tend to see a tinge of racism here. I just cannot understand a situation which is so clear-cut and so clear, why they are failing to see the situation as it is. Thank you.
Okay, Prof, tell us, what would be the alternative if the Western powers that are the only ones who have shown interest in this conflict continue to reject international law, UN principles, and all conflict resolutions in the approach to this conflict? What would be the alternative then?
Well, any people fighting for liberation ultimately have to depend upon themselves and offer themselves. And if that means fighting to everybody exterminated, then that is it. But somehow I do feel that the position of the Western world is perhaps an initial position dictated either, one, because they are not aware of the true situation on the ground, or two, by some economic interest, especially if their cooperating partners is in bed with Cameroon Republic and they don't think they want to offend that their cooperating partner, so take those positions. But eventually, I do believe eventually, good sense eventually prevails and things do turn around. I remember distinctly in the East Timor case that was supported to the hilt. Indonesia was supported to the hilt by America. And the attitude was that Indonesia was a power there. And everybody aligned with that American position. Dramatically, one fine day, the situation changed. And such situation may come about either as a result of a new personality that comes to power, or of a new realization that what had been done was not correct, and therefore they must have an ethical attitude towards this whole thing. So those things do change. So I don't think, for me, I don't think this situation will remain permanent like this. I think a few months, a few years down the line, things are bound to change.
Thank you very much, Prof. Now, I want us also to discuss another aspect of this conflict that we keep hearing from the British and some Western scholars. They tell us that, oh, don't look behind, be forward looking. Each time we try to state the facts of our case, to produce evidence, all they confront us with is, oh, don't look behind. The British have gone back to their union with Europe and withdrawn, but they turn around and tell us, oh, no, please, you see, you are looking behind. If you tell us the story, we don't want to hear your story. We want you to look behind. So how do we look forward in this situation of annexation and foreign subjugation of the true owners?
No, you can't prescribe that just go forward stupidly like that. It has not happened. Anybody who lectures all like that has not read history. One of the basic things anybody who read history in primary school, when they tell you there's a war, they ask what are the middle causes of the war, what are remote causes of the war, which means you go back and start doing and trace and come there to see what happened. This is basic, this is elementary. So anybody who says, no, forget about the past, if you forget about the past, how then do you go into the future? You can't go to the future without considering the past. So anybody who is saying that, and unfortunately, people who say that, like in the case of the British, I don't believe that view reflects the British official position. But somebody comes out and is spewing that in the hope that people will be frightened, not to remind the past, the British of the past, of what happened. But Britain is part and parcel of this whole equation. This territory was under them, given to them by the League of Nations and by the United Nations. And that's part of our history. You can't escape that. Britain cannot escape that. They're not due to that. And by saying that, we are not saying we are calling upon the British to come and be the one to send boots on the ground to fight to liberate us. We're not saying that. We don't know what we are saying. As all liberation movements have always said, it's good for the people to fight for their own freedom and get it. But we are saying that the British should not obstruct us by willing and dealing at international level, whether it is at the level of the EU or whatever, level of the United Nations, whatever, or behaving in a manner that suggests that they've conceded that Ambazonia was given to France through Cameroon Republic. That's all we're saying. And what prevents Britain from raising a voice on this thing? I said, no. Unlike in the case of Northern Cameroon, this one here, there was never a situation where we say we recognize Southern Cameroon as part of Cameroon Republic. There's no such document to attest to that. Even the UN itself, you are saying, even the UN itself, they have all the documentation. They have everything. And I expect the UN Secretary General, as the ethical voice of the UN, to be much more implicated in resolving this whole thing than he has up to now been.
Thank you, Prof. Now, another issue that we have to deal with is the fact that we have seen that many Western scholars and organizations have held conferences on this conflict. I don't know whether to say unfortunately or, but they have never invited subject matter experts of the Southern Cameroons or Southern Cameroon liberation movements to tell their own story. Instead, what we find is that it is Western scholars trying to tell the story of Ambazonia in the place of Ambazonians. How do you explain this phenomenon? How do you explain this phenomenon?
Yeah, it's an oddity. I think they should know better that if you are discussing something about A, you get people who know A to come and make their contribution. that does not prevent you having those you consider to be experts. So the people from that place should come, even if you want to so that tell their own story. And I think, in a sense, this is part of the paternalistic attitude which we object to. It's a kind of taking a position of superiority and imagining that we down there, we are just at the receiving end and probably have nothing to contribute, which is most unfortunate. I expect them to do it, invite the experts, if they want to invite the experts, but also invite those who are directly involved, who know the story and know how to tell the story. And secondly, then is having meetings and having conferences, you may have 1,000 of them. If there are no follow-up, there are no outcome, they are meaningless, absolutely meaningless. You know, become more of an academic exercise. People come down and talk, drink tea, and then go home. And then feel fine, sleep well. They think they have contributed in resolving the issue. Nothing has been resolved, nothing has been done yet.
Dennis, let me give you one more question because members of the audience have to ask many questions.
Yeah.
Okay, let us discuss something that we have hardly discussed in this conflict. I don't see our own news media saying it. I don't see many people articulating this angle. The aspect is, it concerns the joy, the liberation, and the good neighborliness that will result from the separation of Ambazonia from La République du Cameroon, since they are completely incompatible. They don't speak the same language. They don't have the same legal system. They don't have the same educational system. They don't have the same mentality. They disagree on every single aspect, including the nature of what the state should be run like. Now, why are we not seeing that only happiness, economic prosperity, human fulfillment, and healthy collaboration between La République du Cameroon and Ambazonia will follow once the injustice against Ambazonia is ended? What is the obstinacy about keeping these two warring parties together when they can enjoy a peaceful and harmonious relation once the injustice is ended? So I want you to expatiate on this so that maybe people can see that we should not be blinded by a certain desire to keep these people together, fighting each other and missing the opportunity of ever living their own lives. So please explain that to us. Let us understand why, where this obstinacy comes from.
There's a certain myopia which is involved in all of this. People don't see beyond their noses. And secondly, for an entity like Cameroon Republic, they think there's a dignity issue involved. Dignity mean that, like what I talk about minority. Oh, how can minority come and dictate to us and so on and so forth? Look at this territory, we tend to keep it and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Europeans are smarter than us in that respect. Once they see this begin to happen, they realize you can't keep people perpetually at loggerheads. And for this, Cameroon Republic should have no illusions about this. By behaving the way they're behaving, what they're simply saying is these two separate and distinct territories and people will keep on fighting and fighting and fighting. And they will constitute a threat to international peace and security in the Gulf of Guinea. And in the nature of some of these things, it's difficult to predict how it may turn out. Any right-thinking people would have behaved exactly like the Czechs and the Slovaks did, because they realized we can't get on. Why are we fighting? Why should we be fighting each other? There's more we can gain by being separate states and being good neighbors. And it's changing many things, concluding many treaties and so on and so forth, than insisting with the horsewhip that we must be together when we know that that togetherness will never, never happen. In 1,000 years will not happen. And the only strength, so to speak, Cameroon Republic seems to get from this they believe that in that arrangement or togetherness, they will have the horse whipping. It wasn't that case. They would long since, if that was not the case, they would long since have given up and said, no, we don't have to go that route. But we have a country where there are so many hawks, many bellicose people, people who for a long time have always nursed nothing but hatred for Ambazonians and would like to see them disappear from the surface of the earth. That was driving from Cameroon Republic, those individuals. So they need to know and they need to be educated. The two countries, like people have always said, you can choose whom you deal with. But in the matter of countries, you can't choose your neighbor. In matter of parents, you can't choose your parents. You get your parents, you get your neighbors. It was possible for us simply to move Ambazonia as being a neighbor of Cameroon Republic. That would have been done, moving and relocate somewhere else, but that you cannot do. The reality is that these countries must stay separate from each other. And the refusal of Cameroon Republic is the more surprising because on the 1st of January 1960, they achieved independence from France. That independence did not involve any undertaking by France or any power that are going to get Ambassador to be a part of you or associate with you even. We could well have, the vote could well have gone to Nigeria, which would have been for me a clear case of reunification, given that we had been in Nigeria from 1914 to 1960. So in 1961, we would have still been reunited with Nigeria. But the oligarchy that had always been running affairs in Cameroon Republic is blinded by some of these things. They are not honest, and they don't realize that the future of French Cameroon or Cameroon Republic lies in an accommodation with an independent Southern Cameroon. And believe me, and I know what I'm talking about, if they don't seek that accommodations very soon, and the two countries go their separate ways, and they allow this thing to go on, the killing, the massacre, the destruction to go on, the genocide to go on, the liberation which is bound to come, and after that liberation, Cameroon Republic will find itself in a very, very difficult situation.
Thank you.
It's very good for them now to do this thing right away.
Thank you very much, Professor Anyangwe. Thank you, Dennis. We'll bring all of you back, but let's give a moment to members of the audience listening to this. We have 130 of them. Indicate by raising your hand, I will call you. And after the audience, we'll bring KK Regine. I can please ask your question, KK.
Get some water.
KK, please. Please spotlight KK Regina. KK. While waiting for KK, Temitope. Okay, KK is here. Go ahead.
Hello, good evening, Professor Falalola.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for organizing this conference, and also to Professor Carlson Anyangwe for your very eloquent response to the questions. My question is about the role of France in perpetrating this crisis in Cameroon. How does French imperialism affect the crisis in Cameroon? Professor Carlson, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that is a very, very opposite question. French imperialism does. You might want to know that although French Cameroon parades itself as a sovereign independent country, it has actually never been independent from France. And I'm not saying this out of my own thing. The last colonial governor of French Cameroon, called Pierre Mesmer, wrote a book in which he confessed that France gave French Cameroon what he called fictitious independence. That is his confession. And everything that has happened in Cameroon Republic from the time of President Hijo to President Biya demonstrate that fact that it has been fictitious independence. Because France is the one pulling the strings behind and supporting whatever is happening in Cameroon, not only the commission of atrocities there, but also controlling, as is now common knowledge now, the financial monetary situation in French Cameroon. And you might well also know that it's very difficult for French Cameroon to make appointment without getting the authorization of France. I don't know whether the position has changed in the last few years, but up to recent times, that was the situation. You made your list of appointees, you took them to France, okay, then you come back. And the French had the right of first refusal for any contract you want to award to any country. They said, no, you must bring it to us. It's only when we don't want it, then we can give it to another country. This is really, for people who come from, let me say, English-speaking countries, this is really, really an aberration. In fact, in some cases, when I tell people, they say, no, that's not possible. In this day and age, it's not possible. Yes, so France remains the Western power that is supporting Cameroon Republic to the hilt in this mess. If France were today to tell French Cameroon, stop the rubbish, it would stop overnight. That is it, full stop.
Temitokwe, your question, Temitokwe.
Greetings, Prof. Can I be heard? Can I be heard?
Yes, please go ahead.
Firstly, I want to thank Professor Falola for this evening, for the program, for the event, it's quite inspiring. Quickly, I just want to add that, Prof, and thank you, Prof, for the intervention so far. The discussions have been quite interesting. But again, I would like to know that, what's the place of the African identity in all of this?
What's the place of what?
And I'm asking questions of Kwame Nkrumah. The African identity in all of these discussions. Because when we return to the conclusions of Kwame Nkrumah in his book, Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism in Africa, he had warned us long time ago that there will come a point in time in Africa where we would have cannibalistic, nation states. And in reality, that is what we have at this time. Whether in Cameroon, whether in Nigeria, whether in Kenya, that's the reality of Africa today. And so for us to be able to understand that what is happening on the continent at this time needs, requires us to return to the question of where's the place of the African identity in our struggle. Because I've listened to Professor and I've listened to some comrades before this time, for really, when the crisis started, some of us had the opportunity of making freedom fighters, really in Lagos, Nigeria. We can't, of course, disclose the identity of these comrades of ours. And we asked them, because they were consistently saying that, they identified themselves as Anglophones, and that they are fighting the Francophones. And really, I'm saying that, or we were saying then that, you haven't really understood the struggle, identity that themselves oppressive.
Thank you, Dr. Fagunwa.
We're talking about
Thank you. Your question is very clear. Let me add to that question. So, because where it's leading you is why can't we have a United States of Africa? Why are we thinking all these identities? That's where it's going.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mabiru. I think, yes, you've asked a question which is in the minds of a number of Africanists who have said, look, why are we seeking identities that are imported identities, imposed on us by colonialism and so on? And that therefore we should fight more to assert our African identity. On a theoretical plane, that is very, very correct. But remember that the identity question is at multiple levels. And if you pitch the identity at the African level, even though even at that level, you have to define exactly what I mean by the African level, the African. Because as you know, it is not too obvious that our brothers in North of Africa really identify themselves as Africans. And as you know, a country like Morocco has sought admission into the EU. And Morocco's thesis is that it has its head in Europe, but its feet in Africa. If you get what I mean by that. So even that Africanness would have to be defined. Maybe you think of sub-Saharan Africa, probably, I don't know. But the point is, the question of identity is located at different levels. The African identity, under the African identity, there are other levels of identity, which you cannot just sweep away. And in some instances, you might talk of national identities within the African identity, or ethnic identity within the African, within those national identities. Furthermore, it is very difficult to comprehend and establish an African identity when there are component parts of Africa that are still chafing under oppression and colonial rule. It will not work. You will simply now want to transfer that crisis, that conflict, to a level on African level. So much as the late President Kwame Nkrumah discussed that issue at that particular time, in my view, if even at the creation of the AU or the OAU, they had pitched it directly at that level and said, this is African United States of Africa, or Union of Africa, whatever name we might want to call it. And at that point, we dissolve all African borders. We dissolve it. And we dissolve all links with former imperial powers. And therefore, we have a tabula rasa, a new slate, and we begin from there. That would be our own creative thing for Africa, what we want to do. But it never happened. And as you know, the whole argument between the Casablanca group and the Moroccan group and whatever, the whole debate was on that issue, isn't it? And so we did never arrive at anything. And then eventually we find ourselves today in a situation where we find ourselves, where even the AU now is a lame duck. So at the moment, we need to satisfy these different identities before we can aspire to that greater African identity.
Thank you so much. Can we go to Sheikh Jika? Sheikh Jika, please. Sheikh. Please unmute, Sheikh.
Unmute.
Yes. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. It's good to see you again, Prof. I got a simple question here. I mean, we all are somewhat educated about history of our nation, and everybody knows. You gave us quite some more detailed information how tricky the international handling of our situation is, which is preferable and very welcome. My question, anyway, I don't know who I'm asking this question. Now we're talking amongst each other, under us, just, you know, like a palaver. I don't mean it bad, please don't get me wrong, but why are there not representatives of the international media here present? That's the way we could educate them, and they could be educated by us. This is what I'm missing. So that is my question. Where is the international media? Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I defer that question to Professor Tony.
Thank you. Let's take that as a comment and let us, we do not know who is here because we have, the last time I told you 13, we've grown to 17,000. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe they're here. I don't know because we're running on 7 platforms, including one in Europe.
Okay, so then let's assume there are some media centers here.
Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully, we can pray for that. My suggestion is for whatever we do. I've been recently to so many Zoom meetings, and what I was always missing is the presence of the international media. So please forgive me. Thank you very much.
Professor Da Silva, University of Ibadan, is your turn. Thank you, Shea. Professor Da Silva, your question, please. Can you unmute Professor Da Silva?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Anyangwe and Professor Falola for this forum. I want to latch on to what Temitope asked the other time, and then it has to do with even the way Professor Anyangwe also responded. And that again has to do with the question that Professor Falola asked generally when he said, how many countries can or shall Africa have? I want to say that following the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference, and then the colonialists, drew artificial boundaries and called them countries, in Africa, without taking cognizance of what makes nations, language, cultural peculiarities, and all of that. And that is why to date, when we look at the agitations across Africa, they are nation-bound, they are nation-centered. Yoruba is a nation within Nigeria and is already agitating, wants its own nation to stand out. Biafra, the same. And I want to say that instead of allowing these agitations here and there, and then, forming a lot of crises and killings, is it not possible to seek for the intervention of African Union Commission, whereby, of course, maybe these artificial boundaries may pay some countries, but other countries that do not want this kind of artificial boundaries, but that want their own nationhood to stand out. Is it not possible to have a redrawing, a redesigning of countries in Africa now determined by their nationality, that is the nationhood within these countries? Let them be recognized as entity, and then we can now call it United African States or something, to solve the problem once and for all. Thank you.
Okay. Now, to Da Silva, I think that is perhaps the best proposal I've ever heard for decades. And to me, all the Africanists, people are talking about Africanism, whatever thing it is, and so on. This is the best solution. We should have a Berlin Conference type of a conference on this continent. And then recurve according to, if we are serious about this United African thing, everybody talks about, but not doing anything about it. If we are serious, let's put that African map there and say, okay, fine. We want the United States of Africa or Union of Africa, whatever state you might call it. And please, we invite all. This is not your head of state business. We invite the communities involved, send delegations. We might have this conference that might last a whole year, doesn't matter. Let's put this map down and so on. We start on this area here. Who are the people who feel comfortable in this? There are nations here. We will redraw it and so on, and like that, and like that, and like that. In fact, you might come out, for all I know, and I think that's why I see that Silva's question linked to what the Prof had asked earlier. You might come out with fewer states than you have today on this continent. If you do that exercise, probably. you know. The problem is, I don't detect in the AU any political will to change the status quo at all, at least not the bureaucrats that are running the AU now. They are still there and just content to maybe earn a salary, that's all. No initiative, no creativity, nothing for the African continent. That will be a very good beginning. I, for one, I'll subscribe to, have no problem with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jojo Ambaso, if I do not pronounce your name very well, do please forgive me. Jojo Ambaso. Go ahead, please. Jojo, please ask your question.
Yeah, okay. I was trying to unmute. Yeah, I would just like to first of all comment on what the professor said regarding a redrawing of African boundaries. I don't think it's everything about colonialism or this division that is bad. Yes, they created artificial boundaries, so to say, in Berlin. We have accepted those artificial boundaries. Let's work on those artificial boundaries. I tried to carry out a research on Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah's independence was emphasizing on the economical independence of Africa. We do not need to create a United States of Africa. We need to create some sort of the type of European Union in Africa, where we work economically, we respect these borders, we are tolerant to each other, and we build our economy. We start from there. It will be a waste of time for us to go back to start drawing boundaries. And my question is to anybody who can answer the question, what is the implication of the alliance between Mr. Paul Biya and Buhari in regards to the Amazonian question?
Thank you.
Well, please, I'll leave you to answer this. Let me just take the one which Jojo asked about redrawing of boundaries. No, what we are saying is that people who are not comfortable where they are, and they're putting the boundary into question, yes, let them have the opportunity to change those boundaries if they want to. Many people tend to forget that this is what happened in Europe after the First World War. In fact, in Europe, it's very interesting because not only did they have change of boundaries, but populations were moved. You see that? Populations were moved from one part to another and so on and so forth, and withdrew things and so on. So in that exercise, communities that feel that they find comfortable with the colonial boundaries that were drawn, no problem. The whole idea now is to make people feel comfortable where they are, so that you don't have this talk which you keep on talking, that people are seceding, secession overnight, every day, and so on and so forth. And I think that will put an end to our discourse. Secondly, for the question about the Buhari-Biya alliance, my take in that is, I don't know, President Buhari already has a lot of things on his hands, and I would have thought he should have concentrated on fighting the Boko Haram thing, insurgency, or jihadist movement. But it seems that is of little interest to him, and he wants to get involved in a foreign adventure. But as for Biya's policy has always been to use Nigeria to satisfy himself. And the interesting thing, Professor Tony, is this. Let me tell you, people don't realize. The attitude of Cameroon Republic, dictated by France, has been that Nigeria is a very inconvenient neighbor and has expansionist tendencies. And that so long as Nigeria remains what it is, French agenda, Cameroon Republic, the other neighboring country, which unfortunately surrounds Nigeria, all English, French speaking, are unsafe. That's one of the reasons that prompted France to support Biafra. That as far as we are concerned, Nigeria needs to splinter into different groups. And so here you find Biya using Buhari to serve his own interests. And that's what Buhari, for some interesting reason, President Buhari doesn't even seem to realize that. But I think his intelligence officer would have briefed him and told him that, look, that's what this guy just simply tried to use you for his own purpose and doesn't care. What is Buhari's quid pro quo from Biya? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Thank you.
But of course, other people, Prof, you may want to give your own perspective to that.
Okay. Farouk Boge. Farouk, your turn, please. Farouk. Farouk, yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much, Prof. I don't know if I'm here now.
We can hear you, sir.
Yeah, well, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Professor Falola, for this opportunity. And I also want to extend my gratitude to Professor Carlson for the in-depth analysis so far since the beginning of this dialogue. My own intervention or my own question per se is that Prof has been able to trace the cultural, the ethnicity perspective to this division between the two states, so to say. But what are the economic implications? What are the economic angle to this? The issue about control of resources, the issue about the Bakassi Peninsula issue. What are the economic implications to this struggle?
Thank you, Farouk. Thank you, please.
Thank you. I think thank you for that perspective. Indeed, you know that the Bakassi thing and the Niger thing, these are the things that are driving those two countries. Bakassi and the oil reserves and what Cameroon Republic say it is oil reserves, all that come from Amazonia. They have none. And the idea is for Cameroon, Nigeria can help it so that it secures that this oil continue to flow. You know, Ambazonia's contribution to the economy of Cameroon is about 70% of its economy. Ambazonia goes, it will virtually just crumble. It will become another part of the Central African, French Equatorial Africa bad case. Buhari, of course, for him, he appears to be interested in ensuring stability in the Niger Delta, where a lot of oil is being produced and so on and so forth. But the point about all of this is that what they forget is that there are other actors, and these actors are the oil companies. The oil companies would not necessarily follow any of these guys once their interests are implicated in all of this. And they'll stand to do whatever they want to do to protect their economic interests as far as this is concerned. So yes, you are right. There are a lot of economic interest involved in all of this whole thing. And I think Ambazonians are aware of this. And I do suspect also the Biafrans are aware of this. So that is where we are on this whole thing. And no one is deceived. No one is deceived about that unholy alliance.
Thank you very much. Julius Inde. Julius Inde. Julius, yes.
Yes, thank you, Professor Falola and Professor Anyangwe for this great program. Yes, I have a question which goes as it's been burning among many of our comrades around, and that is what will you say is the role of the African or the Ambazonian diaspora to the Ambazonian struggle, as well as the role of social media? Will you also elaborate on their merits and demerits, specifically to the contribution to the liberation struggle?
Okay.
Thank you. Let me add to that question.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
Let me add to it. Is this struggle created by your people in the diaspora, or is it created by people based on the ground?
Okay. The straight answer is the diaspora did not create this struggle at all. It's a homegrown struggle. Okay. The demonstrations and all of that did not take place in the diaspora. When the war was declared, the people who took up the machetes, the sticks, and started fighting were not from the diaspora, people from the ground. What has happened is diaspora has provided necessary help, assistance in the face of a war which the people were never prepared for. And the diaspora rose up to the occasion. We're able to say, look at so many of our boys who are now fighting. Bare hands, literally, I can say literally bare hands. Look at how many refugees have been displaced now in Nigeria. Look at how many internally displaced people. What do we do with all of these people? And they rose up to the occasion by providing assistance, by trying to provide as relation to the fighters and say, well, look, you are fighting with machetes against a professional army and with AK-47 and so on. That is not going to go anywhere. So you must look for alternative ways of getting arms to face these people, even if just you're fighting a self-defense war. And the ground itself devised the strategy of obtaining weapons, strange as it may seem, from the enemy. I will say, and it's no secret I'm saying here, that we have supplies provided to the ground by Cameroon Republic military itself. Even right now, as we speak, they do. And whenever the boys mount any operation, they get weapons. It's like exactly what happens to the Eritreans and the Ethiopians. They got their weapons from there. So what's happened? The diaspora also rose up by providing necessary assistance to refugees and internally displaced persons, by contributing money. The African thing we know, you pool resources and so on, and you put somebody who is in need and say, okay, provide this and so on. And in that way, the diaspora has played a very significant role as far as the Amazonian war of resistance is concerned. And that role will not be diminished.
Thank you very much. Desiree Balubi, it's your turn, sir.
Thank you, Professor Falola. Thank you, Professor Anyangwe. I'm Desiree Balubi, originally from Benin Republic, and I'm at Norfolk State University in the United States. I'm a Yoruba born and raised in Benin Republic. And the way I see these issues, I think we got to learn from history. And Professor Falola is here to share. He is a modest person, very humble, but he has a lot to share with us. Let us not reinvent the wheel. Some people may think history is just the telling of stories of the past, but history, excuse me, Professor Falola, I'm not the one to define what history is, but my understanding of history is that it's the best foundation upon which we can build the future. Whoever ignores their past will not know where to go. And the history of Africa, with all of those things, horrible and good things that happen, I think we should learn from that. And life itself is science. Some people believe that it's not science. History is science. Languages are science. And if they are sciences, then they have rules, they have laws. And if you do certain things under certain conditions, you get the same result. And the bottom line is that it's our women and children who suffer the most. Where are we taking this? But I will salute the initiatives. This is the very first time in history, as far as I can remember, that people enter into dialogue. People out of frustration, they've been denied of their human rights, their rights to territory, to land, and to who they are, self-determination. I understand all of that. And I salute these initiatives. It's very good. We must all applaud it. But please, let's work together so that we don't roll back what we have gained. Those colonialist, imperialistic powers, they will never yield an inch. They will never allow us to be united. And I'm not, a fool to dream that Africa will be united overnight, but at least we can have a union. Even the United States here, it's not united, it's a union. It's a union where you have the state of, they are not that totally independent, but they are a state, but they are federal law. So Nigeria is there as an example for us. So if things work out fine in Nigeria, you see what can happen at the continental level. So here, my dear colleagues, intellectuals that we call ourselves, let's help the people who are now struggling, bring them together, and let's talk about this, and let the historian, the psychologist, the sociologist, please help us. Because I have my cousin in Nigeria, I have them in Togo, in Ghana, the Yorubas are everywhere. And that's all I can say. Thank you so much, Professor Falola and Professor Anyangwe.
Professor,
thank you very much.
Comment. Let's go to Anthony Asong for your question. Anthony Asong, please. Anthony Asong.
Thank you, Professor Falola. This question is for you. If you cannot answer the question, I probably think Professor Anyangwe may have something to say about it.
Let him answer.
The question, this question is about the relationship between Buhari and Paul Biya recently, with the support Buhari, pronounced for Paul Biya. And I wanted to, draw our attention back to the 80s when Cameroon and Nigeria, they had, because of the Bakassi Peninsula, there was a conflict. And this conflict ended through negotiations. And during those negotiations, there was a document, I think it's called the Green Tree Accord. Yes. I do not know, is the Green Tree Accord, why is it such a secret? Nobody knows the contents of the Green Tree Accord. Professor Falola, do you know what was agreed during that conversation when they came up with that document, the Green Tree Accord? Professor Falola.
Thank you very much. I think Buhari's position is not difficult to understand. He cannot be facing insurgencies, demands for new republics, Oduduwa, Biafra, and support the Macedonian. That will be a contradiction. So he has to fix the problems in his own house before he can move to his neighbor's house. So, and don't also forget that the relationship between Nigeria and Cameroon is very deep in history. The first president of Cameroon, with due respect, Aidjo, was also partly Nigerian from Adamawa. Don't forget that. And don't forget Bakassi region, Niger Delta, there's a deeper interconnections there. So that at a regional level, people are more interlocked. And don't forget that the relationship between our people and the states are usually not the same. On the ground, people are far more interlocked.
Yeah.
So the Bakassi one is very, very complicated because even people on the ground did not agree with Obasanjo in the Nigerian part that he should have given Bakassi away. But don't forget the role of Kofi Annan, Obasanjo's ambition to become the Secretary General of the United Nations, and other variables that played out in this crisis. In the interest of time, let me call Andy. I will answer your question privately by email. Andy, please. Let's move on to Andy. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Prof. And I would like to thank you particularly for organizing this meeting. And I would like to thank Professor Carlson for the very interesting responses that he has been giving the whole evening. I will just start by saying that recently there was this crisis in Chad, and immediately the crisis happened, the AU made pronouncements. The crisis in Central Africa, where the rebels are fighting the government, the Central African governments came together immediately and convened a meeting. Now, I want to know exactly why, in this particular case of Amazonia, the AU has not said anything since it started. Is it that they are afraid, in quotes, of Bimbia, or what exactly is the reason for that? Thank you very much.
And maybe they are, I don't know. But one thing is very, very clear. And I'm not saying anything which is new. It's generally said that the AU has been captured by France. Unfortunately, the AU itself cannot pay its way through anything. It depends upon foreign donors, especially Western countries, the Chinese, to build them the structure and so on. And they say he who pays the piper dictates the tune. So France has a mole in the AU, in the person of the AU Commission chairperson. And that's why what happened in Chad, he never said anything. He is from Chad. You know, he never said anything at all. Of course, when it comes to Amazonia, the AU finds itself conflicted at many levels. First of all, the AU itself preaches the sanctity of borders as obtained at independence. And they know very well that Cameroon Republic obtained its independence on 1st of January 1960. If they were to drum that into the head of French Cameroon, that would be the end of French Cameroon adventure in Amazonia. On the other hand, the AU argues that it supports its member state territorial integrity and independence. Of course, if they were to say that, they will buy the story of Cameroon Republic, which pretends that its territories include the territory of Amazonia. The AU knows very well that it does not. It does not at all. At least any person in the AU who has read the story, they know our story and know that it is not. And so therefore, finding itself in this quandary, they prefer to bury their heads into the sand like an ostrich. See nothing, hear nothing, and do nothing. That has been their attitude, unfortunately. And I say it's most unfortunate because you have even the UN and some international organizations which defer to the AU for a resolution of this matter. As you are aware, there was one time the Council of the Wise decided to say, okay, we are going to figure out what is happening here and do something. And they even convened a conference to hear all the sides. We made submissions and so on. And that initiative died an unnatural death up to today. So the AU is in a big quandary. And I'm not surprised because way back, the late Shah of Iran, in a conversation with Jimmy Carter, the president of the United States of America at the time, confided in Jimmy Carter that the general view, at least in the Middle East and everywhere, is that at that time was the Organization of African Unity, that the organization is an impotent organization. And when there was a changeover to AU, we thought you're going to shed that, but the AU has not proved itself to be as strong as everybody expected. And so it has fell into that same quandary of impotency, not being able to do anything.
Thank you very much, Valentine Kate. I will take 3 more and then ask all the panelists to make their closing statements. Valentine Kate. If I don't answer it very well, I apologize.
Correctly pronounced, Valentine Kate.
Very good.
Yeah, I don't have a question, I just have a statement. Okay. The presentation has been very enlightening, and I appreciate it. And the next thing I wanted to say, because I saw there was one professor from Benin Republic and lecturing in the US.
Yeah.
Desiree. Prof, I'm glad you come from a Francophone territory. And please wake up the Francophone continents. They're bringing Africa down. I originate from the territory, which is French-speaking Cameroon, but my grandfather settled in Muyuka in 1910. So what is happening in Africa? Africa has been held hostage by French-speaking people who don't want to go and study the history of Africa. Currently, as I'm sure there is a crisis in the African Parliament, and the other day, Malema in South Africa the other day was gross on the French-speaking African parliamentarians because of the nonsense they're trying to introduce in the African Parliament. I believe that there should be a concerted effort on this continent to rise against France. France is the poison of Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amber Farmers. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prof, and for the opportunity. The question I'd like to ask is, the Ambazonian conflict has been going on for 5 years with almost 30,000 civilians killed. And the Ethiopian Tigray conflict has gone on for about 8 months, and there are about 2,980 civilians killed, give or take. And 2 weeks ago, the US ambassador to the United Nations was actually on BBC championing for the Ethiopian Tigranian situation to be brought to the United Nations Security Council. So the question that I have for you is, are the lives of the Tigrayans and the Ethiopians much more important than the lives of Ambazonians that have lost almost 30,000 people? What accounts for the reason why the US ambassador to the United Nations is actually championing the presentation of the case to the UN Security Council? Thank you.
Yes, that's one of the paradoxes of the international system. They choose and pick whom they want to support, when they want to support, and how they want to support. My reading is that they are saying, in effect, they have more interest to protect in the Ethiopian situation than they have in the Ambazonian situation. That is the only way I can see them doing that. Moreover, remember that the way this international system is organized, and I think, Tony, you correct me if I'm wrong, the perception is that these powers do defer to former colonial powers in respect of the territory they controlled. So something happening in an English-speaking country in Africa, they look and say, oh, which is the colonial power? And they say Britain, and they go to Britain, what is your position on this particular issue? If Britain were to say, well, we don't think that is this thing, the US will just drop, or some other country will just drop, I show no interest in it. Or if a French-speaking country, they defer to France. Because remember, these are all NATO countries, and they all are what they call, they're friends. They are connected one way or another. And if France says, well, and leave this whole thing as an internal matter, the tendency for them to neglect it and don't bother about it. That is the only way I can interpret the attitude of taking to this whole thing. And that's why earlier I did say, I expect the United Nations Secretary General, the ethical voice of the United Nations, to be able to come out to UN Security Council and say what, in his opinion, should be the situation, rather than to expect the Security Council to tell him what he should do. At least that's what Kofi Annan did, was able to resolve the issue in East Timor, and said, no, we must take the responsibility to protect. We must take action on this particular issue. We have the current Secretary General who appears to be a bit, you can see from this, is a bit aloof on committal and so on and so forth. That's perhaps some of the problem which we do have.
Thank you very much. Let's bring all our panelists back. I will ask all of you the same question, and in 1 minute, do please answer the question, and then we'll make our closing statements. Please, crew members, bring all of them back. One person is, Judith is missing. Where's Judith? Very good. I want to ask all of you the same question, and I give you a minute each to answer it. So, South Sudan, successful case of secession, Eritrea, but the two of them are not working. So, if these two are not working, why do you want a country that may not work? Yeah, let me start with you, Maggie.
Okay. Thank you for that very interesting question, because we've been working on that scenario actually with Judith's Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations. And we realized one thing that we do have in Southern Cameroon's Amazonia is a very, very highly educated, professionalized society. We look back at our history, and we were a country in, whether you call it West Cameroon, Southern Cameroon, or whatever, that actually had systems that worked. And we want to replicate, but also leapfrog those systems into the 21st century. So we are preparing for that. In other words, we know that everybody is looking at South Sudan, looking at Somalia, etc., and saying this is not working. We want to be different. We know we are different, and we are ready to show that we are different.
Judith, are you different? Can it work?
We are different, and it will work. Why? Like he has said, there's a lot of working going on in the background, and we are not stupid. We are reading the history. We are learning the lessons. So we are not going to let history repeat itself. So there are some Cameroonians, the Ambazonians, who are working in the background to see what went wrong.
Yeah.
So that those same mistakes are not made. And there is a concerted effort. If you see the questions I asked, those are the sorts of things where the population, those in the leadership, are trying to make sure that they counter and they work and they make sure that those same mistakes are not revisited. And Prof, thanks for the answers you gave to those questions, because those are the pertinent questions that the international community worries about, that it doesn't take us down the same path. And just to say, Prof Falola, no two conflicts are the same. And no two peoples are the same. And the hope is, and the plan is, we will not be the same.
Dennis,
thank you.
You've consulted.
Let me say that it is a mistake to say it has not worked. If a machine breaks down for one day, don't say it has not worked. It is not the end of time. Let us remember that South Sudan is not the only country that has civil war. Older countries than South Sudan, Spain, Soviet Union, Yugoslavia, Ethiopia,
UK,
Nigeria,
France,
and so on have had civil wars. So why are we looking at this as something that has not worked? No, this is simply a small internal conflict that has been resolved, or that will be resolved. So I want us to understand that you cannot say to a people who are suffering annexation, subjugation, that it is better to remain subjugated than to have a chance of making your own mistakes and learning from them. No, the nature of a human being is to learn from his own mistakes. So nobody should ever tell you that it is better for you to eat somebody's own shit than to eat your own. That is the issue. Oh yes, that is the best way I can put it. It is always better for you to suffer your own mistakes than to suffer the mistakes of another person. So for me, at this level, there is no issue whatsoever. We are suffering annexation, colonization, and these are systems of violence. These are systems of violence on the body and the souls of its victims. Nobody should ever suggest that you should continue to be a slave because they fear that if you cease to be a slave, something will go wrong with your life. No, it will be your own mistakes, and therefore you have a chance of correcting them. Thank you.
Professor Anyangwe, what do you think it will take your movement to stay as part of United Cameroon? In other words, instead of being 2 cubes of sugar and tea.
That will not melt.
I can assure you, for the past 60 years, Cameroon Republic has done nothing whatsoever.
Suppose they begin to do things.
Yeah, to reassure the people of Amazonia that they can ever possibly live together.
Suppose they begin to reassure you.
No. For 60 years, by your conduct, by your expression, by your words and your deeds, you've not done that. The recent killings now, you kill 30,000 people, 40,000 people, destroy this thing. That's proof that they can deal with them. There's no way. And I think like Dennis said, there's just no way. We are diametrically opposed. We don't agree on any single thing at all. So it's not possible, even in 1,000 years.
Okay, please make your closing statement. Yamagi Dongwewe, make your closing statements. Closing statements, please.
Dr. Falola, I'd like to really thank you for inviting the Southern Cameroonians to your series, your interview series. We've all appreciated that, and it's a great opportunity for us to take our case to the world. Out of every 4 Africans, 1 is a Nigerian. So we are really, really happy that a Nigerian as a brother took up our case, and we really appreciate you for doing this. I want to say in my closing statement that last November, when the Coalition for Dialogue and Negotiations organized a conference, Dr. Amos Sawyer, the interim president of the Republic of Liberia, in his address to the CDN conference, insisted that for sustainable peace to happen in Southern Cameroon, the concerns of the 20% must be satisfactorily addressed. He said, if there is a mistake, another mistake, and the concerns of that 20% minority in that relationship that we are, if our concerns are not successfully, satisfactorily addressed, we will find ourselves in a very, very long-term war. Now, when I look at the vast majority of the grievances that Southern Cameroonians have put and listed in their marginalization within the RRC, immediately you begin to talk about separation. All of those grievances that we see are wiped out immediately. When you talk about the language, you create your own country. There is not that language issue. When you talk about education, we create our country. There is no education issue with LRC. When you talk about the legal systems, we create our own. There is no more. When you talk about the administration, we create our own. There is no more. And when we separate from them, there is the human rights issues, the brutality, the employment opportunity, as we talked about in the CRTV example. All of those things, including the human resources and natural resources that we have, those disappear. So the viable solution to our problem now is, and let's not sugarcoat it, it's good separation, clean and simple. It would be a hard negotiation, but we are prepared for that. And the LRC cannot lie to us that we don't have leaders who are negotiating, who can negotiate for us. We do. So once they are ready, instead of dragging the pain of our people any further so that we become bad neighbors, we should right now solve the problem and remain good neighbors. That's all I can say. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll come back again.
Ms. Judith Mwana, your closing statement, please.
Thanks once again, Prof. Falola, for organizing this. It was really, really enlightening. And Prof. Anyangwe, it was a pleasure, as always, to have this opportunity to chat with you on the salient issues. My closing remarks really, Prof. Falola, is this opportunity on behalf of all Southern Cameroonians, and I say this with so much emotion as people know me, on behalf of all Southern Cameroonians, I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate to the government of Cameroon that this crisis will not be solved by war. It will not, it cannot, and it will not. The frontline groups are ready for dialogue. They have been. After the loss of lives on both sides, mind you, on both sides, there will still be need for dialogue and negotiations. So why engage in the loss of lives? This is not an internal issue to Cameroon. If it was, then the fighting will still not be going on and the issue would have long been solved. Cameroon would have been able to solve the crisis. This now is beyond our boundaries. We can't keep doing the same thing and expecting different outcomes. The fighting needs to stop. There is too much suffering. You, me, our children, and our children's children. The international community needs to use all within its powers to enforce a ceasefire, negotiations, and dialogue addressing the root causes. If not resolved today, believe you me, our children, our grandchildren will raise this issue up again, and every time the crisis will be deadlier. Now is the time for a mediated, negotiated settlement. We need a mediated solution in a neutral territory with external guarantors as signatories. And I hope the international community is listening, because there are enough Southern Cameroonians out there willing to fight this for a very, very long time. But we need their intervention, because if it had to be resolved in 5 years, it has not gone anywhere. Thank you once again, Prof. Falola, for giving us the opportunity to speak about what's going on.
Thank you, Judith. Dennis, please, your final.
Prof, let me join the other speakers to thank you for organizing this. I think it has been very enlightening for the rest of the world. Judy just took my final word from my mouth. But I want to say that this conference is organized principally for the world and for La République du Cameroon to understand that this matter is different from what they are trying to peddle in the international community. We are calling on all reasonable minds in Cameroon to stand up and say, let this war come to an end. Cameroon cannot surrender its life to one single person called Bimbia. He cannot choose to sacrifice his soldiers. He has turned them into assassins, murderers, killers. The role of a soldier is not to go out there and kill people because the president says go and fight. The role of a soldier is to defend just causes, is to defend national territory, is to defend life, property. Cameroon soldiers are not doing any of those things in this case. Bimbia has decided to waste the lives of Cameroon soldiers. It is time for this war to end. It is time for this war to end. We appeal to Dion Gute, who is an Amazonian. Whether he likes it or not, he's an Amazonian. He should be able to stand up and say, I also want this war to end. Let them stop the pretense. It will not help anybody. It will not help anybody. We can go on forever. We can allow white people come and deceive us to kill each other. They just stand and say, look at those Africans. They say Black lives matter. If Black lives do not matter to them, how will they matter to anybody else? So this is something that concerns Africans as Africans. It is not for Africans to keep killing themselves and making a fool of themselves to the rest of the world. So let us understand that we owe it to ourselves to be reasonable, to sit down and say, how can we resolve this matter? And we'll be able to resolve it. I thank you very much. I call on Cameroon again to accept dialogue, internationally mediated dialogue, so that this matter can be resolved. There is no reason to kill one extra person before a solution is found. Thank you.
Professor Anyangwe, your closing statement, sir.
I think those who preceded me have made matters easier for me, and I concur with all the views they've expressed. And I think they're very strong and they're very powerful. And I'm just saying that the continuation of these killings that are going on there and the destruction constitute a recruitment agency for our boys. And the more they kill, the more people they recruit to this, to defend the territory. So, like everybody has said, the best way out for Cameroon Republic is to accept dialogue or negotiation. So we can get on the table. Every war eventually ends up on the negotiation table. Why do you have to waste a lot of time before getting on the negotiation table and waste so many lives unnecessarily? When you see some of those people being killed, you wonder, why are they being killed? Why are the French Cameroon soldiers being killed? You wonder. Is our liberation feasible? And I can assure you that our liberation is not really feasible and is bound to come. Everything that has been happening is simply a battle of the mind, because whoever conquers the mind colonizes you. So you always have night. Night is always there, but the sun will always appear. And like Frank Fanon said, every generation, out of its own obscurity, must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. Our liberation is on course, and we shall be free. And I want to end up with this very famous song. It's an elegy, a lament of our people, and all of you, where's Yao? All of you can, Dennis, all you can, you should just join me. And the whole thing you all know, our people know. Oh, how many people Paul Biago kilo? How many people Paul Biago kilo? How many people Paul Biago kilo?
How many people Biago kilo?
Oh, Igor retire.
Oh, retire.
Oh, retire. We shall never give up the fight. Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much.
Let me thank all our crew members, our technical people. We're very grateful. We remain very grateful to other platforms and TV networks that join us, 7 of them based in other places. We are very grateful for the partnership. We thank you, Dennis, Judith, and Professor Anyangwe. Please join us next week, Sunday, when we interview the King of Ondo Kingdom. Thank you. Bye-bye to you all. We're very grateful.
Hail this land of glory, we the Amazonian, nation loyalty. Praises to our Savior who granted us the freedom, and legends to the hero who brought the land we gather. Glory to glory, we rise and never to fall. Here in a nation, flowing with the holy. Glory, glory, glory to the Father for making you a nation, a joy forevermore. Ambazonia, land of freedom, you shall live in plenty, meet in our need, and your joy Man for me, love the light. One goes away.